There are trainers who pass through the regions quietly, catching what they find and moving forward without leaving much behind. Then there are trainers whose journeys echo across continents, whose partnerships reshape what people believe is possible between humans and creatures. One trainer stood at the beginning of his path with nothing but a stubborn electric mouse and a dream that felt too large for the small town he called home. The bond that formed between them would ripple across every region he touched. Before you drift off, consider subscribing for more calm Pokemon stories, as we're getting close to 2,000 subscribers, and your support helps the journey continue. What began as a rocky partnership in Pallet Town grew into something that transcended typical trainer relationships, spreading across Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and beyond. The morning Ash Ketchum overslept marked the beginning of everything that followed. He arrived at Professor Oak's laboratory after all the traditional starter creatures had already been claimed by other new trainers, beginning their own journeys. What remained was a Pikachu who had no interest in following commands, no desire to enter the containment of a Pokeball, and absolutely no patience for a trainer who arrived late and unprepared. That yellow electric mouse shocked Ash the moment they met. The electricity coursed through him as a clear message that this partnership would not follow the expected script. Pikachu walked alongside Ash only because there were no other options, maintaining distance, rejecting every attempt at connection or friendship. The rejection continued as they left Pallet Town and headed toward Viridian City. Pikachu refused to battle, refused to listen, refused to acknowledge Ash as anything more than an inconvenience forced upon him by circumstance. The gap between them seemed unbridgeable. Then came the swarm of Spearow, descending from the sky in a fury that neither of them had anticipated. Ash had provoked them accidentally, and now they sought revenge with single-minded determination. The flock grew larger as more Spearow joined the chase. Ash ran. He ran carrying Pikachu in his arms, despite the fact that Pikachu had given him nothing but resistance since they met. He ran even as the Spearow struck at him, their beaks sharp and their intent unmistakable. He ran because protecting this creature mattered more than his own safety. Pikachu watched from within Ash's embrace as the trainer took blow after blow, never once letting go, never once considering abandoning the Pokémon who had rejected him so completely. Something shifted in that moment, something fundamental about how Pikachu understood what it meant to have a partner. When Ash fell, too exhausted and too injured to continue running, Pikachu made a choice. The electric mouse leaped from Ash's arms and positioned himself between the fallen trainer and the attacking flock. The electricity that had shocked Ash in rejection now surged outward in protection. Lightning split the sky. The Spearow scattered. And when the storm cleared, two figures stood together in a way they hadn't before. The bond that formed in that moment became the foundation for everything that followed. Pikachu never entered a Pokeball. That detail remained consistent across every region, every battle, every challenge they faced together. The refusal was no longer about stubbornness or rejection, but about a partnership that existed outside traditional structures. Pikachu stayed at Ash's side by choice. They traveled to Viridian Forest, where Ash encountered a small green caterpillar clinging to a tree branch. Caterpie looked at Ash with large, hopeful eyes, and Ash extended a Pokeball without hesitation. The capture happened smoothly, without struggle or resistance. Caterpie became Ash's first official catch, a creature so gentle and eager to please that even Misty's intense fear of bug types couldn't diminish its cheerful nature. The caterpillar wanted nothing more than to make Ash proud. Battles came quickly in those early days. Caterpie faced opponents larger and more experienced, taking hits that would have discouraged other creatures. But the little bug persisted, evolving first into Metapod and then, in a moment of brilliant transformation during a battle against Team Rocket, into Butterfree. Butterfree emerged with wings that caught the light like stained glass. The evolutions represented growth, but also an approaching farewell. Butterfree was meant for the sky, meant for migration, meant for a life that couldn't include staying with a trainer forever. When the time came for the pink Butterfree migration, Ash watched his first captured Pokémon fly away to start a family. The goodbye hurt, but it was the right kind of hurt, the kind that comes from caring deeply about someone else's happiness. In that same forest, Ash found a Pidgeotto that would become one of his most reliable flying types. Later, when Team Rocket attacked and Pidgeotto pushed itself beyond its limits to protect the group, it evolved into Pidgeot. The large bird became a symbol of strength and loyalty. But like Butterfree, Pidgeot's story included a goodbye. When a flock of Pidgey and Pidgeotto needed protection from a group of aggressive Spearow and Fearow, Pidgeot stayed behind to guard them. Ash promised to return, a promise that lingered unfulfilled as his journey carried him forward into new regions. The pattern of partnerships, followed by necessary separations, began to define Ash's journey. Some Pokemon stayed with him across multiple regions, while others remained behind for reasons that made sense even when they caused pain. Bulbasaur entered Ash's team as a protector of other Pokemon in a hidden village. The grass and poison type had taken on the role of guardian, watching over weaker creatures who couldn't defend themselves. Convincing Bulbasaur to leave required proving that Ash could offer something beyond safety. The bond formed gradually. Bulbasaur respected strength but valued kindness more. Ash demonstrated both, and eventually Bulbasaur chose to join the team not because it had to, but because it wanted to see what else existed beyond the village it had always protected. Bulbasaur refused to evolve, even when given opportunities. The choice wasn't about weakness or fear, but about being comfortable in its current form. When other Bulbasaur evolved into Ivysaur during a festival celebrating evolution, Ash's Bulbasaur declined, and Ash supported that decision without question. The respect between them deepened because of moments like that, moments where Ash demonstrated that growth didn't require transformation, that being yourself was enough. Charmander's story began with abandonment. Damien, its original trainer, left the fire type waiting on a rock in the rain, promising to return but never intending to keep that promise. Charmander waited anyway, the flame on its tail growing weaker as rain continued to fall. Ash found Charmander in that vulnerable state and brought it to a Pokémon Center despite the fact that Charmander technically belonged to someone else. The healing process saved Charmander's life, but the emotional wounds took longer to address. When Damien returned and demanded Charmander back, the fire type made a choice. It looked at Damien, the trainer who had abandoned it, and then at Ash, the trainer who had saved it. The choice was clear. Charmander joined Ash's team, carrying trauma that manifested as distrust. It took time for Charmander to believe that Ash wouldn't leave it behind, that this partnership was real and lasting. Slowly, through consistent care and respect, that trust built. Evolution came during a battle where Charmander pushed itself to protect the team. The transformation into Charmeleon brought increased power but also increased independence. Charmeleon didn't always listen to Ash's commands, testing boundaries, asserting its own will. The dynamic shifted again when Charmeleon evolved into Charizard. The large fire and flying type became almost uncontrollable, ignoring Ash's instructions, doing whatever it wanted regardless of strategy or safety. Charizard's arrogance stemmed from its power, and its refusal to respect Ash created tension that couldn't be ignored. The turning point came during a battle in the Orange Islands, when Charizard faced a Poliwrath and lost badly. The ice attacks left Charizard frozen and helpless. Ash stayed up all night, rubbing Charizard's body to generate warmth, refusing to give up even when it seemed like the fire type might not recover. Charizard woke to find Ash still there, still trying, still caring. The realization that Ash's commitment was unwavering changed everything. From that moment forward, Charizard fought for Ash with the same intensity Ash had shown in protecting it. The bond between them became legendary. Charizard returned for major battles, always answering when Ash needed its strength. The separation that came when Charizard stayed at the Cherisific Valley to train was temporary, a pause rather than an ending. Squirtle appeared as part of the Squirtle Squad, a group of abandoned water types who had banded together and started causing mischief in a small town. They wore sunglasses as a symbol of their unity and their rejection of the trainers who had abandoned them. Ash earned the Squirtle Squad's respect by taking a hit meant for Pikachu, showing the same protective instinct that had first bonded him with his starter. The leader of the Squirtle Squad, the one who would eventually join Ash's team, saw something in that moment worth following. Squirtle brought a playful energy to the group. It loved attention, loved performing, loved showing off its water-type attacks in creative ways. The combination moves it developed with Pikachu became signature strategies, blending water and electricity into displays that were as beautiful as they were effective. When Officer Jenny needed help protecting a town from fires, Squirtle discovered a new purpose. The Squirtle Squad reformed as a firefighting team, and Ash's Squirtle became their leader. The goodbye was bittersweet but necessary, another example of Ash prioritizing his Pokemon's happiness over his own attachment. Krabby was caught during a beach episode, almost as an afterthought. Ash threw a Pokeball at the water type without much strategy, and Krabby went along with the capture without resistance. The creature was sent immediately to Professor Oak's lab, since Ash already carried 6 Pokemon. Krabby remained at the lab for a long time, seemingly forgotten in the rotation of team members that Ash actively trained and battled with. Then came the Pokemon League, and Ash needed every advantage he could gather. He called on Krabby, and the water type proved itself in ways no one expected. During a crucial battle, Krabby evolved into Kingler and dominated its opponent with powerful water attacks and incredible physical strength. The evolution happened at exactly the right moment, turning an overlooked Pokemon into a tournament asset. Kingler's story reminds us that potential exists even in creatures who don't receive constant attention, that growth can happen in waiting, that timing matters as much as training. Mook's capture happened in a polluted power plant where poison types thrived in the toxic environment. The sludge Pokemon was causing problems, blocking pipes and disrupting operations. Ash caught Mook more out of necessity than strategy. Mook's affection manifested as smothering. The poison type loved Ash so much that it would tackle him, cover him in sludge, and generally make life difficult through excessive displays of love. Professor Oak dealt with this behavior more than Ash did, since Mook spent most of its time at the lab, but Mook proved its worth in battle. The poison type's bulk and powerful attacks made it a reliable choice when Ash needed a tank that could absorb hits and return them with interest. Mook's loyalty never wavered, even if its expression of that loyalty was sometimes overwhelming. Tauros entered Ash's team not as a single Pokemon, but as 30 of them, all caught during the same incident in the Safari Zone. Ash threw Safari balls at a stampeding herd, and somehow ended up with 30 identical normal types. The sheer absurdity of having 30 Tauros became a running element of Ash's journey. They stayed at Professor Oak's ranch, running free, occasionally being called upon for battles, but mostly just existing as a reminder of that chaotic day in the Safari Zone. One Tauros became Ash's primary choice when he needed a normal type for battle. That particular Tauros proved itself capable and strong but the other 29 remained in the background, a peculiar footnote in Ash's capture history. Lapras entered Ash's life as a rescue. The large water and ice type was being attacked by a group of trainers on Tangelo Island. Ash drove them off and helped Lapras recover from its injuries. Lapras bonded with Ash, thus during the time it spent healing. The gentle creature was young, separated from its family, and alone in waters it didn't fully understand. Ash became its protector, its guide, its family. The partnership lasted through the Orange Islands, with Lapras serving as transportation across the ocean and as a powerful ally in battles. When they finally found Lapras's pod, the family of water types it belonged to, the goodbye was inevitable. Lapras returned to its own kind, but the bond with Ash remained. Years later, when Ash returned to that region, Lapras recognized him immediately, the connection undiminished by time or distance. Heracross joined Ash's team in the Johto region after causing trouble by drinking sap from trees that other Pokémon relied on. The bug and fighting type was powerful but single-minded in its pursuit of sweet tree sap. Battles with Heracross often included moments where it would get distracted by nearby trees, abandoning strategy to satisfy its craving for sap. But when Heracross focused, it was nearly unstoppable. The combination of fighting power and bug-type resilience made it a formidable opponent. Heracross had a particular fondness for Bulbasaur, often latching onto the grass type, to Bulbasaur's great annoyance. The dynamic added humor to the team, but also showed how different personalities coexisted within Ash's roster. Chikorita appeared as a wild Pokémon who developed an immediate attachment to Ash. The grass type challenged Pikachu to a battle, lost, but decided that Ash was someone worth following anyway. The capture happened easily because Chikorita wanted to be caught. The attachment evolved into something almost possessive. Chikorita was jealous of other Pokémon who got Ash's attention, particularly Pikachu. The jealousy created tension, but also demonstrated how deeply Chikorita cared. Evolution into Bayleaf happened during a moment of crisis when Chikorita pushed itself beyond its limits to save Ash from danger. The transformation brought increased size and power but didn't diminish Bayleaf's affection. Bayleaf's tackles became problematic. The grass type would run at Ash with the same enthusiasm it had shown as Chikorita, but with significantly more mass. Ash ended up flattened repeatedly, knocked over by pure affection delivered with too much force. The love Bayleaf showed was unconditional and overwhelming. Even when Ash tried to create boundaries, Bayleaf found ways to express its feelings, to stay close, to be part of every moment possible. Cyndaquil entered the team as a timid fire type who couldn't control its flames properly. The creature would try to use fire attacks and produce only small puffs of smoke, embarrassing itself repeatedly. Ash saw potential where others saw weakness. He encouraged Cyndaquil, worked with it, helped it build confidence. Slowly, the fire type's attacks became more reliable, the flames growing stronger as Cyndaquil's self-belief increased. Cyndaquil never evolved during its time with Ash in the Johto region, remaining in its first form even as it became more capable. The lack of evolution didn't indicate lack of growth. Cyndaquil became a valued team member, reliable and brave despite its initial fears. The fire type's gentle nature balanced the more aggressive personalities on Ash's team. Cyndaquil proved that strength comes in many forms, that quiet determination matters as much as loud confidence. Totodile was caught at a lake, where multiple trainers were trying to capture the same water type. Ash won the race, and Totodile joined his team with enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. The small water type loved dancing, loved playing, loved battling with an energy that never seemed to diminish. Totodile's jaws were powerful, capable of crushing attacks that could take down much larger opponents. Battles with Totodile often looked chaotic. The water type would dance in the middle of attacks, seemingly carefree even when facing serious danger. But the playfulness masked real skill, real power, real dedication to winning. 2. Totodile's personality brought lightness to the team. Even in difficult moments, the water type's cheerful nature provided relief. A reminder that the journey was supposed to be enjoyable, not just challenging. Noctowl joined Ash's team after a series of events involving a shiny variant causing trouble in a forest. The normal and flying type was more intelligent than typical Noctowl, capable of creating illusions and outsmarting trainers who tried to catch it. Ash succeeded where others failed, not through power but through understanding what Noctowl wanted. The capture felt like a mutual agreement rather than a one-sided victory. Noctowl's intelligence made it a strategic asset. The flying type could anticipate opponent moves, adapt mid-battle, and use techniques that required more thought than simple attack spamming. The shiny coloring made it visually distinctive, a rarity in Ash's collection. The bond with Noctowl was built on respect. Ash recognized the Pokemon's intelligence and treated it accordingly, asking for input rather than just issuing commands. That respect was returned in battle after battle. Phanpy arrived as an egg that Ash won in a tournament. He carried the egg carefully, protecting it until it hatched into a small, playful ground type who loved rolling around and playing with everyone it met. Phanpy's innocence was endearing. The creature approached the world with curiosity and joy, unburdened by the complexities that weighted down more experienced Pokemon. Every experience was new, every battle an adventure. The evolution into Donphan happened during a crisis when Phanpy needed more power to protect the team. The transformation was dramatic, changing the small, playful creature into a large, powerful ground type capable of devastating rollout attacks. Donphan retained Phanpy's cheerful nature, but added significant battle capability. The ground type became one of Ash's most reliable fighters, combining raw power with surprising speed and agility. Beedrill's time with Ash was brief. The bug and poison type was caught during an emergency in a competition, more out of necessity than any real plan to keep it long term. Beedrill helped in the moment it was needed and then was released. Its purpose served. The temporary nature of that partnership reflected a reality of Ash's journey. Not every Pokemon was meant to stay. Not every capture was the beginning of a lasting bond. Sometimes, Pokemon entered and left Ash's life in service of immediate needs rather than long-term relationships. Tylo appeared in the Hoenn region as an aggressive bird who attacked Ash and Pikachu repeatedly. The small normal and flying type refused to back down, refused to give up, refused to accept defeat even when clearly outmatched. That determination impressed Ash. When he finally caught Tylo, it was with respect for the Pokemon's fighting spirit, its unwillingness to quit, regardless of the odds stacked against it. Tylo evolved into Swellow during a battle where its determination wasn't enough to overcome a type disadvantage. The evolution brought the power needed to turn the tide, transforming the small persistent bird into a larger, faster, more capable fighter. Swellow became one of Ash's most used flying types in Hoenn. The speed and aerial maneuverability made it perfect for battles against opponents who relied on ground-based attacks. Swellow's loyalty matched its combat ability. Trieko was found defending a dying tree that it refused to abandon. The grass type stood alone against a group of other Pokemon who tried to convince it to leave the tree and find a new home. Trico refused every argument, every plea, every threat. Ash helped save the tree, and in doing so, earned Trico's respect. The grass type joined Ash's team not out of gratitude, but out of recognition that Ash understood what it meant to be loyal to something, even when that loyalty seemed illogical to others. Trico was cool, calm, and collected in battle. The grass type rarely showed emotion, maintaining a composed exterior even in intense situations. That composure made it reliable, predictable in the best way. Evolution into Grovyle happened when Trico needed more power to protect Ash during a dangerous encounter. The transformation enhanced Trico's speed and attack power while maintaining the cool demeanor that defined its personality. Grovyle's battles were precise. The grass type didn't waste movement or energy, executing strategies with efficiency that bordered on artistic. Watching Grovyle fight was like watching a master craftsman at work. The final evolution into Skeptile was delayed by emotional complications. Grovyle fell in love with a Meganium but was rejected, and the heartbreak created a psychological block that prevented it from using its attacks properly. Ash worked with Grovyle through the difficulty, helping it process the rejection and regain confidence. When Grovyle finally evolved into Skeptile, it was after overcoming both external challenges and internal struggles. Sceptile became one of Ash's most powerful Pokémon. The grass type's combination of speed, power, and tactical intelligence made it a cornerstone of his Hoenn team. Sceptile's victories in major battles cemented its place in Ash's history. Corfish was caught in a river where it was causing problems by eating all the food and disruating the local ecosystem. The water type was aggressive, hungry, and completely unbothered by the chaos it created. That aggressive energy translated well to battle. Corfish fought with enthusiasm that bordered on reckless, throwing itself into combat with crab hammer attacks that hit like freight trains. The water type loved fighting almost as much as it loved eating. Corfish never evolved despite having opportunities. Like several of Ash's Pokémon, it remained in its first form while still becoming a powerful and capable fighter. Evolution wasn't necessary for growth. The bond between Ash and Corfish was straightforward. The water type wanted to battle, Ash gave it battles, and both were satisfied with that arrangement. Sometimes, partnerships are built on simple understandings. Snorunt appeared in a snowy area where it kept stealing from Ash and his friends. The ice type was mischievous, playful, and seemingly impossible to catch or stop from taking whatever caught its attention. Eventually, Snorunt revealed that it wanted to be caught. The thefts were tests, ways of getting attention, invitations for someone to notice it and offer partnership. Ash recognized what Snorunt wanted and extended the offer. The evolution into Glalie happened during intense training before a major tournament. Snorunt transformed into a large, intimidating ice type with powerful ice attacks and significant bulk. The mischievous personality remained, but now backed by real combat power. Glalie became essential during Ash's run at the Hoenn League. The ice type's resilience and attack power helped secure victories that wouldn't have been possible with a less developed team member. Ipom entered Ash's story by stealing his hat repeatedly. The normal type was quick, playful, and skilled at grabbing things and running away before anyone could stop it. The harassment continued until Ash finally caught Apom to end the constant theft. Ipom's energetic personality made it both endearing and exhausting. The normal type was constantly moving, constantly playing, constantly seeking attention and stimulation. Keeping Ipom focused during battles required significant effort. The evolution into Ambipom happened later, after Apom had left Ash's active team and was training with another person. The transformation brought new abilities, but also marked the end of Ipom's time as Ash's Pokémon. Starly was caught early in Ash's Sinnoh journey as a small, common flying type that didn't seem particularly special. The normal and flying type was eager to help, eager to battle, eager to prove itself capable. Evolution into Staravia came quickly, as Starly participated in battles and grew stronger. The middle evolution brought increased size and power while maintaining the determination that characterized Starly's personality. The final evolution into Staraptor happened during a critical moment when Staravia pushed beyond its limits to protect the team. The transformation resulted in a large, powerful flying type with brave bird attacks that could devastate opponents. Staraptor became Ash's primary flying type in Sinnoh. The trust between them was evident in every battle, every moment where Staraptor followed Ash's commands without hesitation, confident that Ash's strategies would lead to victory. Turtwig joined Ash's team after he helped it protect a grove of trees from Team Rocket. The grass type was small but determined, willing to face opponents much larger than itself in defense of its home. That protective instinct aligned well with Ash's own values. Turtwig respected Ash's willingness to help without expecting anything in return, and when Ash offered partnership, Turtwig accepted. Turtwig's battles showcased its defensive capabilities. The grass type could absorb hits that would knock out less resilient Pokémon, then counter with Energy Ball or Razor Leaf attacks that punished opponents for getting close. Evolution into Grotle changed Turtwig's dynamics. The grass type became slower but much bulkier, trading speed for defensive power. The adjustment period was difficult, as Grotle learned to fight differently than it had as Turtwig. The final evolution into Torterra happened when Grotle overcame its frustration about being slower and learned to use its bulk and power effectively. Torterra emerged as a massive grass and ground type, capable of devastating opponents through sheer force. Torterra's size made it perfect for battles where Ash needed a tank that could control the field. The grass type's combination of defensive bulk and powerful attacks created space for teammates to operate. Chimchar's story began with abandonment, much like Charmander's had years before. Paul, Chimchar's original trainer, released the fire type after deciding it was too weak and too emotional to be worth training. Ash saw what Paul missed. He saw a Pokémon with incredible potential buried under trauma and fear. He saw someone who needed a trainer willing to work with their emotions rather than demand they be suppressed. Chimchar joined Ash's team, carrying significant psychological damage. The fire type was terrified of failing, terrified of being abandoned again, terrified that any mistake would result in rejection. That fear initially made Chimchar stronger through a blaze ability that activated when it was desperate, but it also made the fire type vulnerable to losing control. Ash worked patiently with Chimchar, showing consistent support even when battles went poorly. He never punished failure, never threatened abandonment, never made Chimchar feel like its worth was conditional on performance. The evolution into Monferno came during a battle where Chimchar finally trusted itself enough to evolve without losing control. The transformation brought increased power and marked a significant step in Chimchar's emotional healing. Monferno continued to struggle with control of its blaze ability. The power was immense when activated, but came at the cost of rational thought. Ash needed to help Monferno find a way to access that power without losing itself in the process. The final evolution into Infernape happened during a confrontation with Paul. Monferno evolved and finally achieved perfect control of its blaze ability, using the power strategically instead of desperately. The victory over Paul's Electivire represented not just a battle won, but a journey of healing completed. Infernape became one of Ash's most powerful Pokémon. The fire and fighting types combination of speed, power, and hard-won emotional control made it a force that could stand against opponents who had seemed unbeatable. Breezel was encountered battling wild Pokémon in a river, seeking strong opponents to test itself against. The water type was independent, confident, and completely uninterested in being caught by a trainer who couldn't prove their strength. Ash earned Buizel's respect through battle. The water type joined his team, not because it needed a trainer, but because it recognized Ash could help it become stronger. The partnership was built on mutual benefit, rather than one-sided dependence. Buizel's fighting style was aggressive and acrobatic. The water type used its speed to overwhelm opponents, combining water attacks with physical strikes in combinations that were difficult to defend against. Evolution was offered but declined. Buizel had the opportunity to evolve into Floatzel, but chose to remain in its current form, comfortable with its abilities and uninterested in changing. Ash supported that choice without question. Gligar joined Ash after falling from the sky and landing on his head repeatedly. The ground and flying type had trouble controlling its flight, often crashing into things or people unintentionally. The clumsiness was endearing, but also dangerous. Gligar needed to improve its flight control to be effective in battle. Ash worked with the ground type on building confidence and skill in aerial maneuvers. Evolution into Gliscor happened when Gligar finally mastered its fear of heights and learned to trust its flying ability. The transformation resulted in a much more capable and confident Pokémon who could use its aerial mobility as a tactical advantage. Gliscor's battles demonstrated creative use of its typing. The ground and flying type could switch between aerial attacks and ground-based power, keeping opponents off balance and unable to predict what would come next. Gible appeared eating the walls of buildings, causing structural damage across a town. The dragon and ground type was oblivious to the problems it caused, focused entirely on satisfying its hunger. Capturing Gible took significant effort. The dragon type was strong, stubborn, and completely uninterested in being caught. Eventually, Ash succeeded through persistence and strategy rather than overwhelming power. Gable's Draco Meteor attack has never worked properly. The dragon type would attempt the move repeatedly, and it would either fail completely or hit Ash instead of the intended target. The running failure became almost comedic, but Gable kept trying. Despite the Draco Meteor problems, Gable proved itself capable in battle. The dragon type's bite attacks were powerful, and its ground typing gave it advantages against electric types that threatened other team members. Unfezant began as a Pidove that Ash caught early in his Unova journey. The normal and flying type was common in the region, but showed determination that made it worth adding to the team. Evolution into Tranquil came through regular battle experience. The flying type grew stronger and more capable, developing the aerial combat skills needed to compete against more powerful opponents. The final evolution into Unfezant brought significant power and grace. The flying type became elegant and fierce, combining beauty with combat effectiveness in ways that made it a strong choice for major battles. Unfezant's loyalty to Ash was absolute. The flying type never hesitated in battle, never questioned commands, never showed anything but complete trust in Ash's judgment and strategy. Oshawott was chosen as Ash's starter in Unova after escaping from Professor Juniper's lab to follow Ash. The water type was dramatic, often posing heroically and imagining itself as a brave warrior. The reality often failed to match Oshawott's self-image. The water type would rush into situations with confidence, only to realize it was outmatched or unprepared. The pattern repeated throughout their journey together. Despite the tendency toward overconfidence, Oshawott was genuinely capable. The water type's Scalcop attacks were powerful, and its determination to protect its friends and prove itself led to victories in important battles. Oshawott developed crushes on various Pokemon throughout the journey, particularly Emolga and Meloetta. The romantic attention was usually unrequited, but Oshawott never stopped trying to impress potential partners. Tepig's story paralleled Chimchar and Charmander before it. The fire type was abandoned by a trainer, who chained it to a post and left it there to starve. Ash found Tepig in that condition and immediately freed it. The trauma of abandonment affected Tepig deeply. The fire type was hesitant to trust, scared of being left behind again, uncertain whether any trainer would treat it differently than the one who had discarded it. Ash's consistent care slowly rebuilt Tepig's confidence. The fire type began to understand that not all trainers were cruel, that partnership could be based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Evolution into Pignite happened when Tepig faced its former trainer in battle and needed more power to overcome both the opponent and the psychological weight of the confrontation. The transformation brought increased strength and marked another step in Tepig's healing journey. Pignite became one of Ash's most reliable fighters in Unova. The fire and fighting types combination of power and determination made it essential for battles where Ash needed someone who wouldn't give up regardless of how difficult the situation became. Snivy entered Ash's team as a wild Pokémon who was exceptionally skilled at battling. The grass type was calm, confident, and utterly unbothered by most situations, maintaining composure that bordered on arrogance. Capturing Snivy required Ash to prove himself worthy. The grass type didn't join weak trainers, and Ash needed to demonstrate both his skills and his character before Snivy would consider partnership. Snivy's battle style was elegant and efficient. The grass type used Attract and other status moves to create advantages before finishing opponents with Leaf Blade or other direct attacks. Watching Snivy battle was like watching a chess master at work. The grass type never evolved despite opportunities. Snivy was content in its current form, powerful enough to compete without transforming. The decision reflected confidence rather than fear or weakness. Scraggy hatched from an egg during Ash's Unova journey. The dark and fighting type emerged headbutting everything in sight, completely unable to control its aggressive instincts. Teaching Scraggy to function as part of a team required patience. The young Pokémon needed to learn when to fight and when to hold back, when to use its head literally and when to use it figuratively. Scraggy's pants kept falling down, a visual gag that appeared repeatedly, but also represented the Pokémon's immaturity and lack of control over its own body. As Scraggy matured, these moments decreased but never fully disappeared. The bond between Ash and Scraggy was nurturing. Ash treated Scraggy as a student who needed guidance, rather than a soldier who needed commands. That approach helped Scraggy develop into a capable fighter while maintaining its playful personality. Levani began as a Sewaddle that created clothing from leaves. The bug and grass type was shy, hiding from confrontation and avoiding battles when possible. Evolution into Swadloon happened relatively quickly, as Sewaddle gained confidence through Ash's support. The middle evolution brought increased defensive capabilities and more powerful grass attacks. The final evolution into Levani resulted in a caring, nurturing Pokémon who wanted to help everyone around it. The bug type would create leaf clothing for other Pokémon, offer comfort when teammates were hurt, and generally act as a supportive presence. Levani's battles combined offense and defense effectively. The bug and grass type could tank hits while setting up string shot traps that limited opponent movement, creating situations where Levani controlled the battlefield's geography. Palpitoid was caught in a lake, where it was causing problems for local Pokémon. The water and ground type was territorial and aggressive, unwilling to share its space with anyone. Capturing Palpitoad gave Ash a valuable defensive option. The water type's bulk and typing made it resistant to many common attack types, allowing it to absorb hits that would devastate less resilient team members. Palpitoad's personality mellowed after joining Ash's team. The aggression that characterized its wild behavior diminished as it learned to coexist with teammates and trust that Ash wouldn't put it in situations where it needed to defend territory constantly. The water type's attacks were straightforward but effective. Palpitoad didn't rely on complex strategies, instead using raw power and type advantages to overcome opponents through direct confrontation. Boldor started as a Roggenrola caught in a cave system. The rock type was small but determined, willing to face opponents despite obvious type disadvantages. Evolution into Boldor came through persistent training. The rock type grew larger and more powerful, developing the strength needed to compete in serious battles rather than just survive them. Boldor's battles showcased its physical power. The rock type could deliver devastating rock type attacks while absorbing hits that would knock out less durable Pokemon. The combination made it valuable for battles where Ash needed someone who could trade blows effectively. The trust between Ash and Boldor was built through shared experiences. Every battle, every challenge overcome together, strengthened their partnership and made them more effective as a team. Krokorok appeared first as a wild Pokemon with a particular interest in Pikachu. The ground and dark type would appear seemingly at random, challenge Pikachu to battle, then leave afterward regardless of the outcome. The repeated encounters created a relationship built on rivalry and respect. Krokorok wanted to test itself against Pikachu specifically, seeing the electric type as a worthy opponent. Eventually, Krokorok decided to join Ash's team, not because it needed a trainer, but because traveling with Ash meant regular access to battles with Pikachu and other strong opponents. Evolution into Crocodile happened during a critical battle where Krokorok needed more power to protect the team. The transformation brought significant increases in strength and bulk while maintaining the cool confidence that defined Krokorok's personality. Crocodile became one of Ash's powerhouses in Unova. The dark and ground types combination of power, durability, and type advantages made it essential for battles against trainers who relied on electric or psychic types. Hawlucha joined Ash's team in Kalos as a fighting and flying type, who performed in shows before becoming a battler. The luchador-themed Pokemon brought theatrical flair to everything it did. Hawlucha's fighting style matched its personality. The flying type used high-flying aerial attacks combined with wrestling moves, creating a battle approach that was as entertaining as it was effective. The pride Hawlucha took in its appearance and performance sometimes created complications. The flying type wanted to look good while winning, which occasionally led to choosing flashy moves over strategic ones. Despite the theatrical tendencies, Hawlucha was genuinely skilled. The fighting and flying type won crucial battles through combination of talent, training, and the trust it had in Ash's guidance. Froakie appeared throwing what seemed like rocks at Ash, but were actually compacted foam that the water type created. The initial interaction was antagonistic, but Froakie was actually trying to get Ash's attention. Froakie had left its previous trainer because that person didn't match Froakie's standards for what a good trainer should be. The water type was selective, unwilling to settle for partnership that didn't meet its requirements. Ash proved himself worthy, and Froakie joined his team with expectations that Ash would help it become stronger. The water type's standards were high, but that pushed both Ash and Froakie to improve constantly. Evolution into Frogadier came through intense training and battle experience. The water type grew faster and more powerful, developing combat skills that made it one of Ash's most reliable team members in Kalos. The final evolution into Greninja created something unprecedented. The transformation resulted in a form that could sync with Ash through a bond phenomenon, creating what became known as Ash Greninja. The Ash Greninja form brought incredible power, but also incredible strain. The synchronization meant Ash felt damage that Greninja took in battle, making the form dangerous for both of them if they weren't careful. Mastering the Ash Greninja transformation required Ash and Greninja to achieve perfect trust and communication. When they finally succeeded, the form became devastating, allowing them to compete against opponents who had seemed unbeatable. Greninja eventually left Ash's team to help protect Kalos from environmental threats. The goodbye was necessary but painful, another example of Ash prioritizing a Pokemon's greater purpose over his personal attachment. Fletchling was caught as a small normal and flying type who was territorial about its favorite tree. The bird Pokemon was fierce despite its size, unwilling to back down from opponents much larger than itself. Evolution into Fletchender brought fire typing in addition to flying. The transformation marked significant growth in power and capability, turning the small bird into a more formidable fighter. The final evolution into Talonflame resulted in a fast, powerful fire and flying type who could use brave bird attacks that devastated opponents. The final form represented the culmination of Fletchling's growth from territorial small bird to regional powerhouse. Talonflame's speed made it valuable for battles where Ash needed to strike quickly and decisively. The flying type could outmaneuver most opponents, hitting hard before they could respond effectively. Gumi joined Ash's team as a small, weak dragon type, hiding in the rain. The Pokemon was scared of everything, barely able to defend itself against opponents who threatened it. Building Gumi's confidence required patience and protection. Ash needed to help the dragon type feel safe enough to attempt battling, to trust that it wouldn't be abandoned when things became difficult. Evolution into Sliggoo came when Gumi finally developed enough confidence to push past its fear. The transformation brought increased size and power while beginning to address the psychological barriers that held Gumi back. The final evolution into Gudra happened during a battle where Sliggoo needed to protect its friends. The dragon type transformed into a powerful pseudo-legendary capable of standing against opponents who had previously seemed unbeatable. Gudra eventually returned to the wetlands where Gumi had originally lived, staying behind to protect that area from threats. The decision reflected growth and confidence, showing how far the once fearful dragon type had come. Noibat hatched from an egg that Ash helped protect. The flying and dragon type was young and relatively weak at first, needing significant training and care before it could compete in serious battles. Evolution into Noivern came after extensive training and numerous battles. The transformation brought the power and speed needed to function as a fully capable member of Ash's team. Noivern's sonic attacks were its specialty. The dragon and flying type could use Boom Burst and other sound-based moves to damage opponents while also disrupting their ability to focus or hear commands. The bond between Ash and Noivern was built through the time spent raising Noibat from hatching. The care invested in helping Noivern develop created loyalty that showed in every battle, every moment where Noivern trusted Ash completely. Rowlet joined Ash's team in Alola as a grass and flying type who loved sleeping more than battling. The round owl would fall asleep in the middle of battles, in the middle of training, in the middle of basically any activity. The sleepiness was both endearing and problematic. Rowlet needed to learn when rest was appropriate and when focus was required. The lessons came slowly, with Rowlet continuing to nap at inopportune moments throughout its time with Ash. Despite the constant sleeping, Rowlet was capable when awake and focused. The grass type's leaf blade attacks were precise, and its flying ability allowed for aerial maneuvers that created tactical advantages. Rowlet never evolved, remaining in its first form throughout Ash's Alola journey. Like several of Ash's other Pokemon, it proved that evolution wasn't necessary for effectiveness or value to the team. Lycanroc started as a Rockruff who was wild and difficult to control. The rock type was aggressive, independent, and completely uninterested in following anyone's commands. The evolution into Lycanroc Dusk form happened during a pivotal moment when Rockruff needed to evolve to protect Ash. The transformation resulted in a unique form that combined traits from both Midday and Midnight Lycanroc. Dusk form. Lycanroc was powerful, but struggled with controlling its temper. When Lycanroc's eyes turned red, it would attack mindlessly, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Overcoming that rage required training and emotional growth. Ash worked with Lycanroc on controlling the anger, helping the rock-type channel aggressive instincts into focused battle strategies rather than blind fury. The process created a stronger partnership built on understanding and mutual respect. Litten appeared as a stray fire type living on the streets of Alola. The cat Pokémon was independent, distrustful of humans, and seemingly content to remain alone. Ash's persistent kindness gradually won Litten over. The fire type began accepting food, began spending time near Ash, began showing signs of trust that had been absent initially. When Litten's mentor, an elderly Stoutland, passed away, the grief nearly broke Litten. Ash helped the fire type process the loss, providing support without trying to replace what had been lost. Evolution into Torracat came when Litten finally opened itself to caring about Ash and the team. The transformation represented emotional healing as much as physical growth. The final evolution into Incineroar happened during a championship battle against Professor Kukui. Torracat evolved to gain the power needed to compete at that level, transforming into a fire and dark type powerhouse. Incineroar's wrestling-inspired fighting style matched its typing perfectly. The fire type used physical attacks combined with fire moves, creating a battle approach that was both powerful and entertaining. Poipole entered Ash's life as an Ultra Beast from another dimension. The poison type was curious about everything, playful to the point of being mischievous, and completely fascinated by Pikachu. The bond between Ash and Poipole formed quickly despite the fact that Poipole wasn't from Ash's dimension. The Ultra Beast chose to stay with Ash, wanting to explore and learn about this new world. When Poipole's home dimension needed help, the poison type returned to assist. The evolution into Naganadel happened there, transforming Poipole into a powerful poison and dragon type. Naganadel returned briefly to help Ash during the Alola League, showing that the bond hadn't been broken by distance or dimensional barriers. The reunion was joyful but temporary, with Naganadel returning home after the tournament. Melton appeared as a small steel type, attracted to metal objects. The Pokémon would eat anything metal it could find, causing problems as it consumed parts of buildings, vehicles, and equipment. Multiple Melton gathered around Ash, but one in particular bonded with him strongly enough to join his team. That Melton was curious, friendly, and absolutely insatiable when it came to eating metal. The evolution into Melmetal required multiple Melton combining together. The resulting steel type was massive, powerful, and still maintained some of Melton's playful personality, despite its intimidating size. Melmetal became one of Ash's most powerful Pokémon. The steel type's double iron bash attack could devastate opponents, and its bulk allowed it to absorb hits that would knock out less durable team members. Dragonite joined Ash's team in a unique way, approaching him and asking to be caught. The dragon and flying type was already fully evolved, already powerful, and simply wanted to be part of Ash's team. The addition of a pseudo-legendary dragon type at full power gave Ash access to capabilities he hadn't had before. Dragonite could compete against the strongest opponents through raw power and experience. Dragonite's personality was gentle and friendly. Despite its impressive strength, the dragon type was happy to help, happy to battle, happy to be part of a team even though it could have easily survived and thrived alone. Gengar entered Ash's life as a ghost type who had been abandoned by its previous trainer. The situation paralleled other abandonment stories in Ash's journey, and like those other Pokemon, Gengar found with Ash what it had lost. The ghost type's power was immediately apparent. Gengar could Gigantamax, accessing a form that brought incredible strength and allowed it to compete in Galar's unique battle format. Gengar's loyalty to Ash formed quickly, born from gratitude for being given a second chance, and from recognition that Ash would never abandon it the way its previous trainer had. Riolu hatched from an egg that Ash helped protect during a dangerous situation. The fighting type bonded with Ash from the moment of hatching, seeing him as family from its very first breath. The evolution into Lucario happened during a critical moment when Riolu needed more power to protect Ash. The transformation resulted in a powerful fighting and steel type with aura abilities that matched Ash's own. Lucario's aura sense allowed it to detect opponents and understand situations in ways other Pokemon couldn't. That ability made it valuable for battles where environmental awareness was as important as raw power. The bond between Ash and Lucario was special, even among Ash's partnerships. The connection formed from hatching created a depth of trust and understanding that showed in every battle, every moment they fought together. Sirfetch'd joined Ash's team as a Farfetch'd who had been training to become stronger. The normal and flying type carried a leek as a weapon and had dreams of evolving into its Galarian evolution. The evolution into Sirfetch'd came after Farfetch'd achieved a certain number of critical hits in battle, meeting the unusual evolution requirement through skill and determination. Sirfetch'd's fighting style was noble and precise. The fighting type used its leek sword with skill that bordered on artistic, creating battle approaches that were both effective and elegant. Dracovish was restored from a fossil, creating a water and dragon type with an unusual appearance and powerful jaw attacks. The vicious rend move became signature, capable of devastating opponents when used at high speed. Drakovish's personality was cheerful and energetic despite its odd appearance. The dragon type loved battling and loved being part of Ash's team, bringing enthusiasm that elevated everyone around it. The combination of water and dragon typing gave Dracovish advantages against opponents who typically troubled Ash's other team members, filling a valuable niche in his Galar roster. Each Pokemon that traveled with Ash carried its own story, its own personality, its own reasons for joining, and sometimes leaving the team. The partnerships weren't identical, weren't built on the same foundations, weren't even always permanent, but every one of them mattered. Every Pokemon taught Ash something about training, about caring, about understanding creatures who thought and felt differently than he did. Every goodbye made him appreciate the partnerships that remained. The diversity of Ash's team across regions reflected his growth as a trainer. Early captures were often impulsive, driven by necessity or simple opportunity rather than strategy. Later captures showed more thought, more consideration of what each Pokemon needed and what they could contribute. Some Pokemon stayed at Professor Oak's lab, living peacefully on the ranch with dozens of other Pokemon from various trainers. Others were left in their home regions, either training with specialists or serving purposes that mattered more than staying with Ash. The rotations meant Ash was constantly working with different team compositions, constantly adapting to new combinations of types and personalities. That flexibility became one of his greatest strengths as a trainer. He learned to work with bugs and dragons, with fairies and fighting types, with creatures who were cheerful and creatures who were serious. He learned that there was no single correct way to train, that each Pokemon required different approaches. Pikachu remained constant through all the changes. The electric mouse who had shocked Ash on their first meeting never left his side through any region, any challenge, any difficulty. That bond anchored everything else. When new Pokemon joined the team, they learned quickly that Pikachu was more than just another team member. The electric type was Ash's partner in a way that transcended normal trainer Pokemon relationships. Pikachu helped train newer team members, helped mediate conflicts, helped maintain team cohesion when personalities clashed. The leadership role came naturally, born from years of experience and deep trust in Ash's vision. The battles Pikachu fought became legendary, defeating a Regis, matching power with legendaries, standing against opponents who should have been impossible to overcome. Pikachu's victories weren't just about type advantages or lucky hits, but about refusing to give up regardless of odds. That determination influenced every Pokemon who fought alongside Pikachu. They saw what was possible when you pushed beyond perceived limits, when you trusted your trainer completely, when you fought not just to win but to protect something that mattered. The bond phenomenon with Greninja represented something unique in Ash's journey, a synchronization that went beyond normal training. But in many ways, that bond was just a more visible version of what Ash had with all his Pokemon. He felt their struggles, celebrated their victories, mourned their defeats. The connection wasn't always literal, like it was with Greninja, but it was real nonetheless, powerful nonetheless, important nonetheless. When Ash chose to leave Pokemon behind for their own good, those decisions came from that connection. He could feel when a Pokemon needed something he couldn't provide, when staying with him would limit them rather than help them grow. Butterfree needed to start a family. Pidgeot needed to protect its flock. Greninja needed to fulfill its purpose in Kalos. Goodra needed to guard its homeland. Each goodbye hurt, but each was right. The Pokemon who stayed understood why others left. They saw Ash prioritizing his partner's well-being over his own desires, and that selflessness created trust that went deeper than simple obedience. Some trainers collected Pokemon as trophies, measures of their success or power. Ash collected partners, individuals he cared about regardless of their strength or rarity. A common Pidgey mattered as much to him as a rare pseudo-legendary. That philosophy created teams that were more than collections of types and movesets. They were families with dynamics, relationships, histories that extended beyond just battling together. Squirtle and Bulbasaur formed a friendship based on mutual respect and friendly rivalry. Charizard and Infernape understood each other's journeys, from weakness to strength. Bayleef's jealousy of Pikachu was real, but not destructive because everyone understood where it came from. The complexity of these relationships made Ash's teams stronger. Pokemon fought harder to protect teammates they cared about, coordinated better with partners they understood, pushed themselves further when supported by friends who believed in them. Battles became opportunities to showcase not just individual strength, but team cohesion. Combination attacks, protective sacrifices, strategic sacrifices where one Pokemon created openings for another. All of these reflected bonds that existed outside battle. When Ash lost important matches, his Pokemon grieved with him. When he won championships, they celebrated as a group. The emotional investment went both directions, creating partnerships that enriched both trainer and Pokemon. The league challenges tested these bonds repeatedly. Every major tournament pushed Ash and his team to their limits, forced them to overcome opponents who had trained just as hard and wanted victory just as much. Pikachu anchored these runs, but victories required contributions from everyone. Charizard returning to help in a crucial battle, Sceptile overcoming heartbreak to fight at full strength, Infernape mastering its Blaze ability to defeat Paul, Greninja achieving perfect synchronization to compete with champions. The defeats stung because they mattered. Ash didn't collect badges casually or enter tournaments for participation prizes. He competed to win, and his Pokemon shared that drive. But the defeats also taught lessons that victories couldn't. Losing to Tobias, despite fighting incredibly hard, showed that sometimes you can do everything right and still fall short. Accepting that reality without becoming bitter or giving up required maturity. Ash's Pokemon learned those lessons alongside him. They saw him lose and choose to train harder rather than make excuses. They saw him acknowledge opponents' strength rather than diminishing his own efforts. They saw him remain kind even when disappointed. That consistency created an environment where Pokemon felt safe taking risks. They knew that failure wouldn't result in abandonment or abuse. They knew Ash would support them through struggles, help them improve, believe in them even when results didn't come immediately. Chimchar's growth from traumatized fire type to confident Infernape happened because of that environment. Paul had demanded strength without providing support. Ash provided support, and the strength followed naturally. The same pattern appeared with other rescued Pokemon. Charmander, Tepig, Litten, all of them blossomed under Ash's care after previous trainers had failed or hurt them. The transformation wasn't magical, it was simply the result of consistent kindness and respect. Ash treated Pokemon as partners with their own thoughts, feelings, and preferences. He asked for their input, respected their decisions, adjusted his strategies based on what they were comfortable with. When Bulbasaur didn't want to evolve, Ash didn't pressure it. When Squirtle wanted to lead the firefighting squad, Ash supported that decision, even though it meant losing a team member. When Greninja needed to stay in Kalos, Ash said goodbye despite how much it hurt. That respect was returned in countless ways. Pokemon trusted Ash's judgment in battle, even when his strategies seemed risky. They followed commands without hesitation because they knew those commands came from someone who cared about their well-being. The injuries Pokemon sustained in battle were treated seriously. Ash never forced wounded team members to continue fighting, never sacrificed their health for victory. Pokemon centers became regular stops, rest days were scheduled, and recovery was prioritized over maintaining momentum. This care created loyalty that couldn't be bought or forced. Pokemon chose to fight for Ash because they wanted to, because they believed in what they were doing together, because being part of his team meant something beyond just being owned by a trainer. The difference showed in crucial moments. When Ash faced seemingly impossible opponents, his Pokemon found reserves of strength they didn't know they had. When situations looked hopeless, they kept fighting because giving up would mean letting Ash down. Pikachu defeating legendary Pokemon wasn't just about power levels or type matchups. It was about a bond so strong that Pikachu would push beyond what should have been possible rather than accept defeat. That bond existed between Ash and every Pokemon who had traveled with him. The strength varied, the expression differed, but the core remained constant. They were partners, not tools. They were friends, not servants. They were family, not property. The philosophy extended to how Ash treated opponents' Pokemon. He never mocked weak opponents or celebrated victory in ways that humiliated the defeated. He recognized that every Pokemon deserved respect, regardless of strength or rarity. When Ash saw a Pokemon being mistreated, he intervened. He freed Pokemon from abusive trainers, protected wild Pokemon from poachers, challenged systems that treated creatures as disposable resources. Those actions reinforced to his own team that they mattered as individuals. They saw Ash defending Pokemon he had no connection to and understood that his care for them wasn't conditional on their performance or usefulness. The diversity of personalities on Ash's teams meant conflict was inevitable. Pokemon with clashing temperaments had to learn to coexist, to work together despite differences, to find ways to communicate across very different worldviews. Ash mediated these conflicts with patience. He didn't force Pokemon to like each other, but did require them to function as a team. The distinction mattered because it acknowledged that relationships are complex. Sometimes, Pokemon who started antagonistic became close friends. Other times, they maintained professional relationships without developing deep bonds. Both outcomes were acceptable as long as the team could function effectively. The traveling companions Ash journeyed with influenced his Pokemon's development. Misty's presence meant his water types received expert advice. Brock's breeding knowledge helped Pokemon stay healthy. Later companions brought their own expertise and perspectives. Pokemon learned from these interactions too. They saw how different trainers approached similar challenges, how various philosophies could all be valid, how there were many ways to be a good partner to Pokemon. The regions themselves shaped Ash's teams. Kanto taught him basics, establishing patterns that would repeat throughout his journey. Johto tested his growth, challenging him to apply lessons learned and develop new strategies. Hoenn brought type diversity and tactical complexity. Sinnoh emphasized training discipline and strategic thinking. Unova forced adaptation to completely new Pokemon and battling styles. Kalos introduced Mega Evolution and Bond phenomena, pushing Ash to explore connections that went beyond normal training. Alola's casual approach to battling contrasted with previous regions, requiring Ash to adjust expectations and strategies. Galar brought Gigantamax battles and intense competition, testing everything Ash had learned across all previous regions. Each region contributed to his development as a trainer and shaped the Pokemon who joined him there. The Pokemon who stayed in their home regions after Ash moved on continued their own journeys. Charizard trained with other powerful fire types. Squirtle led its firefighting squad. Greninja protected Kalos from environmental threats. Their stories didn't end when they left Ash's active team. They continued growing, continued contributing to their communities, continued being the Pokemon Ash had helped them become. When Ash occasionally returned to visit them, the bonds hadn't weakened. Distance and time changed the nature of the relationships, but didn't diminish them. Charizard still answered when Ash needed help. Squirtle still recognized its trainer immediately. The permanence of these connections speaks to something fundamental about how Ash formed relationships. He didn't view Pokemon as temporary assets to be used and discarded. He viewed them as lifetime partners whose paths sometimes diverged from his, but never truly separated. Professor Oak's lab became a haven for many of Ash's Pokemon. The ranch provided space to roam, other Pokemon to socialize with, and care from someone Ash trusted completely. Pokemon at the lab maintained connections with each other. Bulbasaur often mediated disputes. Kingler enjoyed the pond. The 30 Tauros ran freely across the grounds. Each found their place within the community. When Ash rotated team members, calling Pokemon from the lab to join his active roster for specific challenges, those Pokemon arrived ready to battle. The time at the lab didn't diminish their capabilities or their connection to Ash. This system allowed Ash to work with far more Pokemon than he could have if he'd only kept 6 at a time. He could adapt his team to specific challenges, bringing in type advantages or particular skills as needed. The flexibility also meant Pokemon who needed breaks could rest without guilt. After intense tournament runs or difficult battles, returning to the lab provided recovery time both physically and emotionally. Some Pokemon preferred the lab to constant travel and battle. They enjoyed the calmer lifestyle, the stability, the routine that contrasted with the chaos of Ash's journey. Their preference was respected rather than seen as weakness. The relationships between Pokemon at the lab created networks that extended beyond Ash. Friendships formed, rivalries developed, communities emerged. These connections enriched the Pokemon's lives in ways that traveling with Ash couldn't. Ash trusted that Professor Oak would care for his Pokemon as well as he would. That trust allowed him to leave them without constant worry, knowing they were safe and happy even when he couldn't be there. The communication technology that developed throughout Ash's journey allowed him to check on Pokemon at the lab more easily. Video calls meant seeing how they were doing, confirming they were healthy and content. These check ins maintained connection across distance. Pokemon at the lab knew Ash hadn't forgotten them, knew they still mattered to him, knew they could return to his team if needed or wanted. The balance between having Pokemon available for battles and ensuring they had good lives required constant attention. Ash navigated this balance thoughtfully, making decisions based on each Pokemon's individual needs rather than applying blanket rules. Some Pokemon thrived on constant battling and would have been miserable staying at the lab long term. Others needed the stability that the lab provided and would have been stressed by constant travel. Recognizing these differences and responding appropriately showed maturity that developed over time. Early in his journey, Ash might have tried to force all Pokemon into the same mold. Experience taught him to appreciate diversity. The type coverage Ash achieved across his full roster was impressive. He had reliable options for nearly every type matchup, multiple answers to common strategies, and enough diversity to adapt to unexpected situations. This coverage came from catching Pokemon he connected with, rather than just filling type slots. The emotional bonds created stronger partnerships than purely strategic captures would have. When Ash needed a specific type for a battle, he considered which Pokemon would be most excited to participate, rather than just who had the best stats. That consideration made battles more meaningful for everyone involved. The evolution decisions varied widely across Ash's Pokemon. Some evolved at the first opportunity, eager to become stronger. Others delayed evolution or refused it entirely, comfortable in their current forms. Ash supported both approaches. He understood that evolution brought power, but also changed personalities and dynamics in ways that weren't always positive. The choice belonged to the Pokemon, not him. This respect for individual preferences extended to moves and battle strategies. Ash worked with what each Pokemon did naturally, rather than trying to force them into rigid templates. Pikachu's refusal to use Iron Tail initially was met with patience rather than punishment. Eventually, Pikachu mastered the move because it chose to, because it saw the value, not because Ash demanded it. The creativity in Ash's battle strategies often came from his Pokemon's unique traits or preferences. Combination attacks developed from observing how Pokemon naturally interacted. Improvised moves emerged from desperate situations where standard approaches wouldn't work. This organic development created a battle style that was distinctly Ash's, recognizable but hard to counter because it wasn't based on rigid patterns or predictable formulas. Opponents who tried to prepare for Ash by studying his previous battles often found themselves surprised. The strategies evolved, the team compositions changed, and the improvisation meant that even Ash didn't always know exactly what would happen. That unpredictability frustrated some opponents, but was central to Ash's strength. He adapted to situations rather than forcing situations to match predetermined plans. The trust required for this approach was substantial. Pokemon needed to believe Ash's spontaneous commands would work, even when they seemed risky or unusual. That belief came from seeing those risks pay off repeatedly. When Ash called for unconventional strategies, his Pokemon executed without hesitation. They'd seen him pull victory from seemingly hopeless situations enough times to trust his judgment, even when they didn't understand his reasoning. This dynamic trust created battles that were exciting to watch and satisfying to participate in. Every match felt like a genuine test rather than a scripted performance. The legendary Pokemon Ash encountered throughout his journey influenced him and his team. Battling against legendaries pushed everyone to improve, to reach for power levels that seemed impossible. Pikachu's ability to compete with legendaries inspired other team members. If an electric mouse could stand against the most powerful creatures in existence, then they could push their own limits too. The temporary partnerships with legendary Pokemon taught Ash about respect and restraint. He learned that some Pokemon were beyond capturing, beyond ownership, beyond the normal trainer relationship structure. When he helped legendaries without trying to catch them, he demonstrated that connection didn't require possession. That lesson influenced how he approached all Pokemon relationships. The Z moves and Mega Evolution mechanics introduced new dimensions to Ash's battle strategies. These powerful techniques required deep bonds between trainer and Pokemon to function effectively. Ash's existing relationships made adapting to these mechanics relatively smooth. He already had the bonds required. He just needed to learn the techniques to channel them into these new forms. Greninja's bond phenomenon represented the ultimate expression of this connection. The transformation that allowed them to fight as one was unprecedented and powerful, a physical manifestation of their partnership. The experience changed how Ash understood what was possible between trainer and Pokemon. If that level of synchronization could exist, what else might be achievable through deep enough connection? Gigantamax battles in Galar brought another evolution of these mechanics. The transformations were dramatic and powerful, requiring trainers to think differently about space, scale, and strategy. Ash adapted again, learning to work with Pokemon who were temporarily massive and overpowered. The core principles remained the same, even as the specifics changed. Throughout all these different battle formats and mechanics, the foundation of trust and respect remained constant. No technique, no special ability, no new mechanic could substitute for genuine partnership. Ash's success across regions, with different rules and standards, proved that his approach was fundamentally sound. He didn't rely on specific mechanics or formats, but on relationships that transcended whatever system they operated within. The Pokemon who had traveled with Ash carried those lessons forward into their own lives. Whether they stayed with him or moved on to other purposes, they'd learned what partnership could mean. Butterfree protected its family with the same dedication Ash had shown protecting it. Charizard trained seriously because it had learned the value of commitment. Greninja saved Kalos because Ash had taught it that responsibility mattered. Every Pokemon Ash influenced went on to influence others. The ripple effects of his kindness, respect, and dedication spread far beyond just the creatures he personally traveled with. Wild Pokemon who watched Ash's battles learned different expectations for how trainers could behave. Other trainers who battled Ash absorbed lessons about what real partnership looked like. The impact was subtle but significant, changing how people throughout the regions understood the relationship between humans and Pokemon. Ash never set out to revolutionize training philosophy or change how people thought about Pokemon. He just treated his partners the way that felt right to him, and the results spoke for themselves. The championships, the legendary battles, the impossible victories, all of these came from that simple foundation of caring about Pokemon as individuals rather than tools. When younger trainers asked Ash for advice, he always emphasized the relationships over the strategy. Tactics mattered, training mattered, but none of it worked without genuine connection. His Pokemon demonstrated that truth in every battle. They fought harder for Ash than they would have for a trainer who only valued their strength. They endured more because the struggle mattered to someone they cared about. The exhaustion after difficult battles was shared. When Pikachu collapsed after defeating a legendary, Ash felt that weariness too. When Charizard pushed itself to protect the team, Ash understood the cost. That shared experience created bonds that couldn't be replicated through any amount of technical training or strategic study. It was earned through living together, struggling together, growing together. The journeys across regions represented years of experiences. Early naivete gradually transformed into mature understanding without losing the enthusiasm and optimism that characterized Ash from the beginning. His Pokemon grew with him, matching his development with their own. The team that challenged the Indigo League was different from the team that competed in later tournaments, not just in roster, but in sophistication. Strategies that seemed brilliant in Kanto appeared basic by Kalos standards, but that progression represented growth rather than inadequacy. Everyone starts somewhere, and the willingness to learn and improve mattered more than initial skill level. Ash's Pokemon watched him fail and keep trying. They watched him face trainers who were initially better and gradually close the gap. They learned persistence from those examples. When battles seemed lost, when opponents appeared unbeatable, when situations looked hopeless, Ash and his Pokemon found ways forward. Not always through winning, sometimes through surviving, but always through refusing to quit. That determination became legendary within the Pokemon battling community. Other trainers knew that Ash wouldn't surrender until his team physically couldn't continue. The reputation preceded him into important matches. Opponents sometimes underestimated Ash based on his friendly demeanor or casual approach to preparation. Those opponents usually regretted their assumptions once battles began, because beneath the friendliness was serious dedication. Beneath the casual approach was deep strategic thinking. So beneath the optimism was steel-hard determination. Ash's Pokemon reflected those qualities. They could be playful and serious, casual and focused, kind and fierce depending on what the situation required. The versatility made them difficult to prepare for. A team that could switch between vastly different approaches mid-battle created problems for opponents who tried to counter specific strategies. When Ash reached championships, the pressure intensified significantly. These weren't casual battles against random trainers, but matches against the strongest competitors in each region. His Pokemon felt that pressure too. They understood what was at stake, what victory would mean, what defeat would cost. The awareness made them sharper, more focused, more determined. Losses at championship level hurt deeply because of how much effort went into reaching those stages, but they also provided motivation for next time, lessons about what needed improvement. Ash never blamed his Pokemon for losses. He looked at what he could have done differently, how he might have strategized better, what he failed to see that cost them victory. That accountability created an environment where Pokemon felt safe taking risks. They knew mistakes wouldn't result in punishment or blame, but in collaborative analysis of what went wrong and how to improve. The improvement happened gradually, small adjustments to strategies, minor refinements to techniques, incremental gains in coordination and timing, none of it dramatic individually, but cumulative over time. Years of these small improvements resulted in teams that were significantly stronger than their base stats suggested. The coordination, the trust, the shared experience created multiplicative effects. When Ash finally won a championship in Alola, the victory was sweet not just because of the title, but because of everything it represented. Years of effort, countless battles, persistent growth despite setbacks. His Pokemon shared that joy. They'd been part of the journey, part of the struggle, part of the gradual climb to the top. The championship was theirs as much as Ash's. The celebration after that victory included everyone, not just the active team members. Pokemon at Professor Oak's lab rejoiced. Pokemon who had left to pursue other purposes felt satisfaction. Everyone who had been part of the journey shared the achievement, because it was never just about Ash succeeding. It was about all of them succeeding together, about partnerships proving their worth, about dedication and kindness and respect prevailing. The Pokemon who had traveled with Ash carried stories worth telling. Each one represented a unique journey, unique challenges, unique growth. Pikachu's story began with rejection and transformed into the most important partnership in Ash's life. The electric mouse who shocked its trainer became the friend who stood by him through everything. Charizard's story was about healing from abandonment and learning to trust again. The fire type who refused to listen became one of Ash's most reliable and powerful allies. Greninja's story explored synchronization and sacrifice. The water type who achieved unprecedented connection with Ash ultimately chose duty over staying together. Infernape's story showed trauma recovery and mastery of power that had once been destructive. The fire type who feared its own strength became confident and controlled. Every story mattered. Every Pokemon contributed to the larger narrative of Ash's journey, adding their voice to a chorus that grew richer with each new partnership. The smaller stories were just as important as the dramatic ones. Noctowl's intelligence, Totodila's joy, Cyndaquil's growing confidence, all of these quieter narratives added depth to the overall experience. Ash's journey with Pokemon wasn't defined by any single relationship or single achievement. It was the accumulation of hundreds of moments, thousands of battles, countless small kindnesses, and major struggles. The Pokemon who knew him best understood this. They saw the full picture, not just the highlight reels or championship victories, but the daily work, the routine care, the consistent dedication. That consistency created the foundation for everything else. The legendary battles were possible because of unglamorous training sessions. The impossible victories came from years of gradual improvement. Ash's Pokemon were partners in every sense. They shared his victories and defeats, his joys and sorrows, his growth and occasional setbacks. The relationship was balanced, mutual, reciprocal. When the journey eventually ended, when Ash's story reached its conclusion, the Pokemon who had traveled with him carried forward what they'd learned. They taught their own partners about trust and respect. They demonstrated to other Pokemon what partnership could mean. They passed forward the lessons Ash had taught them through years of shared experience. The impact of those 96 partnerships extended far beyond just the creatures directly involved. Every Pokemon they encountered, every trainer they battled, every region they traveled through was changed by their presence. The bond between Ash and his Pokemon became the stuff of legend. People told stories about the trainer who valued kindness over victory, who prioritized his partner's happiness over his own ambitions, who built a team through love rather than calculation. Those stories inspired new generations of trainers to think differently about their relationships with Pokemon. They showed what was possible when humans treated Pokemon as equals rather than tools. The ripple effects continued long after Ash's active journey ended. His influence persisted through the Pokemon he'd trained, through the trainers he'd inspired, through the battles he'd fought, and the examples he'd set. As sleep begins to take hold, as the details of these 96 partnerships fade into the gentle darkness of rest, what remains is simple truth. Connection matters more than power. Kindness achieves what force cannot. Partnership built on respect creates bonds that transcend individual achievement. Ash's Pokemon understood this from the beginning, or learned it through their time together. They carried that understanding forward into whatever came next, eternal reminders of what one trainer and his partners accomplished together through simple dedication to caring about each other. The stories will continue being told as long as people remember what it means to form genuine connections with creatures different from ourselves. And somewhere in those stories, 96 different Pokemon exist as testaments to what partnership can achieve when built on the right foundations. The training methods Ash developed over years of experience reflected his core philosophy about partnership. He never pushed Pokemon to train in ways that caused genuine suffering or violated their nature. The approach prioritized sustainable growth over rapid results. Some trainers believed in harsh discipline, forcing Pokemon to train until exhausted, punishing mistakes or perceived weakness. Ash witnessed these methods throughout his journey and consistently rejected them. He saw how Pokemon trained through fear became brittle. They performed adequately under normal circumstances, but cracked under real pressure when they most needed to hold together. His own Pokemon trained hard, pushed themselves to improve, endured difficult sessions that left them tired and sore. But the training came from desire to improve, rather than fear of punishment. The difference showed in how Pokemon approached setbacks. When Ash's team members failed at techniques or lost battles, they treated failure as information rather than disaster. Cyndaquil struggled with flame control for weeks, producing smoke instead of fire repeatedly. Ash never expressed frustration or disappointment during that period. He worked with Cyndaquil on building confidence, and the flames followed naturally. Gibble's Draco Meteor failed dozens of times, becoming almost a running joke. The repeated failures didn't diminish Geibel's worth to the team or Ash's affection for it. Eventually, the technique clicked, but the journey mattered more than the destination. This patience with developmental timelines created environments where Pokemon could grow at their own pace. Some mastered techniques quickly, while others needed more time, and both patterns were acceptable. The comparisons between Pokemon were minimized. Ash didn't hold up faster learners as examples to shame slower ones. He celebrated the individual progress rather than creating hierarchies based on arbitrary standards. When Pokemon competed with each other, the competition was friendly rather than destructive. Pikachu and Charizard would spar to push each other, but the goal was mutual improvement, not establishing dominance. These dynamics created teams where Pokemon supported each other's growth. Strong battlers helped train weaker ones instead of looking down on them. Experienced team members mentored newer additions. Bulbasaur took Squirtle under its guidance early on, helping the water type understand team dynamics and Ash's communication style. That mentorship created bonds that lasted even after both returned to different locations. The culture within Ash's teams emphasized collective success over individual glory. A Pokemon who set up opportunities for teammates to score victories was valued as much as one who landed finishing blows. This approach required Pokemon to think beyond their immediate situation and consider how their actions affected the entire team. The strategic complexity that emerged from this mindset elevated everyone's battle intelligence. Ash's ability to read his Pokemon's emotional states during battles allowed him to make adjustments that kept them functioning effectively even under stress. He recognized when Pokemon needed encouragement versus when they needed space to figure things out themselves. The emotional intelligence he developed came from paying attention over years of partnership. He learned what each Pokemon's subtle signals meant, how they communicated discomfort or confidence when they were operating at peak performance versus struggling. That knowledge made him a better trainer than those with superior technical knowledge but less emotional awareness. He could extract maximum performance from Pokemon by understanding them as individuals rather than treating them as generic representatives of their species. The personalized approach meant Ash trained differently with each Pokemon. What worked for Pikachu didn't necessarily work for Infernape. What motivated Sceptile might demotivate Torterra. Recognizing these differences required constant attention and adjustment. Some trainers developed single methodologies and applied them universally. Ash developed individual methodologies for each partner, adapting his approach to match their personalities, learning styles, and motivations. This flexibility extended to battle strategies. He didn't force Pokemon into rigid roles or make them fight in ways that contradicted their nature. Water types who preferred defensive styles weren't forced to be aggressive, and vice versa. The respect for individual preferences created happier Pokemon who enjoyed battling rather than viewing it as obligation or ordeal. When battles were fun or meaningful, Pokemon performed better naturally. Ash's celebration of victories always included his Pokemon as equal participants. He didn't take credit for their achievements or position himself as the sole reason for success. The victories belonged to everyone. Similarly, defeats were shared responsibilities. Ash looked at his strategic decisions when losses occurred rather than blaming Pokemon for execution failures. That accountability created reciprocal trust. The humility Ash showed in victory and defeat influenced how his Pokemon carried themselves. They learned to win graciously without gloating and lose honorably without making excuses. These lessons served them well in battles against opponents who tried to use psychological tactics. Pokemon who were secure in themselves couldn't be easily rattled by trash talk or intimidation attempts. The mental fortitude Ash's team members developed came from consistent positive reinforcement of their worth beyond just battle outcomes. They knew their value wasn't contingent on winning every fight. That security allowed them to take creative risks in battles. They could attempt unconventional strategies without fear that failure would diminish their standing with Ash or their teammates. The innovation that emerged from this freedom created signature moments. Pikachu's use of electricity to magnetize itself to a ceiling, Swellow's development of Aerial Ace through practice, Buizel's creative combinations of Aqua Jet and Sonic Boom. These improvised techniques often came during desperate situations where standard approaches weren't working. The willingness to try new things rather than accept defeat led to victories that shouldn't have been possible. Ash encouraged this experimentation during training sessions. He created scenarios where Pokemon needed to solve problems using their abilities in novel ways, building the mental flexibility required for battle innovation. The problem-solving skills developed through these exercises transferred to real battles. Pokemon who had practiced creative thinking could generate solutions mid-fight that more rigidly trained opponents couldn't match. The relationship between Ash's strategic planning and his Pokemon's execution created a collaborative approach to battling. Ash provided overall direction, but Pokemon had agency in how they implemented strategies. This collaborative model worked because Ash trusted his partner's battle instincts. When Pokemon saw opportunities he missed, they could exploit them without waiting for explicit permission. The fluid command structure allowed for rapid adaptation during fast-paced battles. Pokemon didn't need to pause and receive approval for every decision, keeping the pressure on opponents who relied on more rigid communication patterns. Ash's commands often suggested approaches rather than dictating specific actions. Telling Pikachu to use agility to find an opening left room for Pikachu to determine what specific opening to target and how to exploit it. This suggestive rather than dictatorial command style required significant trust. Ash needed confidence that Pokemon would make good decisions, and Pokemon needed confidence that Ash wouldn't second-guess their choices. The trust was earned gradually through successful collaborations. Early mistakes were treated as learning experiences rather than betrayals of trust, creating safety for both trainer and Pokemon to take risks. When miscommunication happened and strategies failed because Pokemon misunderstood Ash's intent or vice versa, they discussed what went wrong afterward. These debriefs improved future communication. The continuous improvement of their communication created teams that functioned almost telepathically in later battles. Ash could hint at strategies with minimal words, and experienced team members understood immediately what he wanted. New team members required more explicit communication initially, but gradually learned Ash's patterns and preferences. The integration process was smoother because existing team members helped translate Ash's style. The mentorship networks within teams meant knowledge transferred between Pokemon even when Ash wasn't directly involved. Newer members absorbed lessons from veterans through observation and interaction. These peer learning opportunities enriched everyone's development. Veterans reinforced their own knowledge by teaching it to others, and newcomers received diverse perspectives on battle techniques. The social nature of Ash's training approach created teams that were more than collections of individuals. They were communities with shared culture, shared values, and shared goals. When Pokemon left these communities to pursue other purposes, they often replicated similar structures in their new contexts. Charizard brought collaborative approaches to the Cherisific Valley. Squirtle led its firefighting team using principles learned from Ash. The ripple effects of Ash's training philosophy extended through these secondary and tertiary applications. Pokemon he trained directly influenced countless others, indirectly through modeling healthy partnership dynamics. The emphasis on emotional health within Ash's teams prevented many common training pitfalls. Pokemon weren't pushed to the point of psychological breakdown or forced to suppress natural emotions that needed processing. When Chimchar struggled with trauma from Paul's abuse, Ash prioritized healing over battle readiness. The decision to focus on emotional recovery first meant short-term reduction in team strength, but long-term creation of a healthier, more capable partner. This willingness to sacrifice immediate competitive advantage for long-term well-being showed that Ash valued his Pokemon beyond their utility in battles. They mattered as individuals whose health and happiness were important in themselves. The message wasn't lost on his team. They saw Ash put their needs above his ambitions repeatedly, and that demonstration of care created loyalty that purely transactional relationships couldn't match. Some observers criticized Ash's approach as too soft, arguing that harsher methods produce stronger Pokemon more quickly. The criticism ignored how many of Ash's supposedly soft-trained Pokemon defeated opponents, trained through strict discipline. The victories validated Ash's methods more effectively than any theoretical argument could. When Infernape defeated Paul's Electivire, it wasn't just a battle win, but proof that kindness-based training could produce results that exceeded fear-based approaches. These validation moments didn't make Ash arrogant or dismissive of other training styles. He recognized that different approaches worked for different trainer Pokemon pairs, and his way wasn't the only valid path. But he also stood firm in his belief that training should never involve cruelty or disrespect. There were lines he wouldn't cross regardless of potential benefits, values he wouldn't compromise, even if doing so might bring easier victories. His Pokemon appreciated knowing where those lines were. They understood that Ash would never sacrifice their well-being for his glory, never treat them as disposable resources in pursuit of championships. That security allowed them to give everything they had in battles without reservation. They knew the cost wouldn't be their health or happiness or dignity, so they could push limits without fear of permanent damage. The recovery periods after major battles were taken seriously. Pokemon received medical care, rest time, and emotional support as needed. Ash didn't immediately jump into the next challenge without ensuring everyone had processed what happened. These recovery periods served practical and emotional purposes. Physically, Pokemon healed from injuries and restored energy reserves. Emotionally, they processed intense experiences and integrated lessons learned. The processing time made future battles more effective. Pokemon who understood why previous strategies worked or failed could apply those lessons going forward rather than just mechanically repeating actions. Ash participated in these processing sessions rather than delegating them entirely to Pokemon centers. He talked with his team about battles, asked for their perspectives, shared his own observations. The conversations created shared understanding of what happened and why. When everyone had the same picture of events, planning for future improvements became much easier. The collaborative analysis also caught mistakes Ash made that he might have missed on his own. Pokemon sometimes notice things from their battlefield perspective that Ash couldn't see from his position. Incorporating their feedback made strategies stronger and showed Pokemon that their input mattered. They weren't just following orders, but contributing to the team's collective intelligence. This democratic approach to team management was unusual among trainers. Most maintained hierarchical structures where trainers decided everything and Pokemon simply obeyed. Ash's flatter structure required more communication effort, but produced better results. Teams that felt heard and valued performed better than teams that felt like tools being wielded by someone who didn't care about their perspective. The time investment in maintaining these collaborative relationships was substantial. Ash spent hours talking with his Pokemon, observing them, learning their patterns and preferences. Other trainers used that time for additional battle practice or strategic study. But Ash's investment in relationship maintenance paid dividends that pure technical practice couldn't match. When crisis moments arrived and teams needed to function under extreme pressure, the relationships Ash had built allowed his team to maintain cohesion where other teams fractured. Pokemon who trusted each other and their trainer could coordinate complex maneuvers without extensive communication. They predicted each other's actions based on deep familiarity built through shared experience. The synergy that emerged from these relationships multiplied individual capabilities. Two Pokemon working in perfect sync could accomplish things that neither could do alone, and entire teams working together became greater than the sum of their parts. Ash's championship runs demonstrated this synergy repeatedly. His teams weren't always individually stronger than opponents, but their coordination and teamwork often overcame raw power advantages. The lesson wasn't lost on other trainers who watched Ash's battles. Increasingly, younger trainers began adopting relationship focused approaches inspired by Ash's example. The shift happened gradually across regions as more trainers recognized that Ash's success wasn't despite his kind approach, but because of it. The correlation between his methods and his results became too clear to ignore. Traditionalists resisted the change, arguing that proven harsh methods shouldn't be abandoned for softer alternatives. But as kind method trained Pokemon continued succeeding in major competitions, the resistance weakened. The cultural shift in how trainers approached partnerships with Pokemon represented one of Ash's most significant long-term impacts. He changed not just his own Pokemon, but influenced how entire generations thought about training. The ripples extended beyond just battling. Trainers who learned to respect and listen to their Pokemon in battle contexts began applying those same principles to all interactions. Research communities studying Pokemon behavior began incorporating insights from trainers like Ash who prioritized Pokemon perspectives. The resulting knowledge deepened scientific understanding of Pokemon psychology and social dynamics. Breeding programs adopted more humane approaches as the connection between emotional well-being and performance became clearer. Pokemon raised in nurturing environments developed stronger and healthier than those raised purely for battle optimization. These systemic changes happened slowly, often invisibly, as small adjustments accumulated over time. But looking back across years, the transformation in how humans and Pokemon related to each other was dramatic. Ash never set out to change the world. He just wanted to be the best trainer he could be, and his definition of best included being kind and respectful to his partners. That simple commitment, maintained consistently across years and regions and challenges, created impact far beyond anything Ash could have achieved through deliberate activism or campaigning. The authenticity of his approach mattered. Pokemon and other trainers recognized that Ash's kindness came from genuine care rather than manipulation or strategy. When trainers tried to copy Ash's methods purely for competitive advantage without actually caring about their Pokemon, the approach failed. The techniques only worked when backed by authentic relationship. Pokemon could tell the difference between trainers who truly valued them and trainers who were performing kindness for strategic benefit. The emotional intelligence Pokemon possessed wasn't easily fooled. Ash's Pokemon thrived because they knew his care was real. They felt valued as individuals, and that feeling translated into willingness to give everything for the team's success. The reciprocal nature of the relationship meant Ash received as much as he gave. His Pokemon cared for him too, protected him, worried about his well being, celebrated his growth. When Ash struggled with self doubt or discouragement, his Pokemon provided support that helped him persevere. The partnership flowed both directions, with everyone contributing to everyone else's well being. This mutual support system created resilience that purely hierarchical relationships lacked. Teams where only the trainer provided support had single points of failure. Teams where everyone supported everyone had redundancy and strength. The network effects within Ash's teams meant problems rarely overwhelmed them. If one member struggled, others could compensate. If Ash had an off day, his Pokemon could carry more weight temporarily. The flexibility and adaptability that emerged from this distributed support structure made Ash's teams extremely difficult to break. Opponents who targeted specific weaknesses found other team members covering those gaps. The strategic implications of this resilience were significant. Ash could take risks, knowing his team could recover from setbacks. Other trainers had to be more conservative because their teams were more fragile. The aggressive, creative battle style that characterized Ash's approach was enabled by the strength of his relationships. Without that foundation, his strategies would have been reckless rather than bold. His Pokemon's confidence in him and each other allowed them to execute complex maneuvers that required split-second timing and perfect trust. One hesitation or moment of doubt would ruin these strategies, but hesitation rarely appeared. The thousands of hours spent together, the countless battles fought side by side, the shared victories and defeats all created muscle memory of cooperation. Teams could function almost instinctively because the patterns had been repeated so many times. This institutional knowledge within teams gave Ash advantages that newer teams couldn't match. Even if opponents had stronger individual Pokemon, they often lacked the coordination that came from extended partnership. The value of experience in team contexts couldn't be overstated. Veterans like Pikachu brought battle wisdom that freshly caught Pokemon hadn't developed yet, and that wisdom elevated entire team performance. When Ash rotated team members, bringing in Pokemon from Professor Oak's lab for specific challenges, those returning members integrated smoothly because they already knew the patterns and culture. The continuity of culture across roster changes helped maintain team identity even as specific members changed. New Pokemon joining teams with established cultures absorbed those cultures through osmosis and mentorship. This cultural transmission meant lessons Ash taught early in his journey continued influencing his teams years later through Pokemon who had learned from those who learned from Ash directly. The multi-generational transfer of knowledge within Ash's extended team created depth that individual training relationships couldn't match. Every Pokemon contributed to a collective wisdom that outlasted any single partnership. When Ash's journey eventually concluded, the Pokemon who had been part of it carried forward not just personal lessons, but cultural knowledge that could influence their future partners and communities. The legacy of Ash's approach to training would persist through these carriers, spreading principles of respect and kindness to new contexts and new generations of Pokemon and trainers. The transformation from inexperienced 10-year-old trainer to accomplished champion happened gradually through accumulation of small lessons. Each Pokemon taught Ash something new about partnership, battling, or himself. Pikachu taught him that trust must be earned rather than assumed. Charizard taught him that healing from trauma takes time and patience. Greninja taught him that synchronization requires perfect mutual understanding. Every partnership added to his knowledge base, deepening his understanding of what it meant to work with Pokemon effectively and ethically. The education never stopped because each Pokemon was unique. The diversity of personalities, species, and backgrounds among Ash's 96 partners meant he experienced almost every variation of trainer Pokemon relationship dynamics. That breadth of experience made him remarkably adaptable. When encountering new Pokemon or unusual situations, Ash could draw on relevant past experiences to guide his approach. The pattern recognition developed through working with so many different partners served him well. Other trainers who specialized in specific types or focused on smaller rosters developed deep expertise in narrow areas. Ash's expertise was broad rather than deep, giving him flexibility that specialists lacked. The trade-off meant Ash sometimes faced opponents who knew more about specific types or tactics than he did, but his ability to adapt and improvise often compensated for gaps in specialized knowledge. The versatility of Ash's skill set reflected his philosophical approach to training. He didn't believe in rigid specialization, but in remaining open to learning from every Pokemon and every experience. This openness kept him growing, even after years of experience. He never reached a point where he thought he knew everything, never stopped being willing to learn from his Pokemon or his opponents. The humility that characterized Ash's approach, despite his accomplishments, came from recognizing how much his Pokemon contributed to shared successes. He genuinely believed victories belonged to the team rather than just him. That humility made him a better trainer because it kept him receptive to new ideas and prevented arrogance from blinding him to mistakes or areas needing improvement. His Pokemon appreciated the humility because it meant Ash never talked down to them or treated them as inferior beings. They were respected as equals with different capabilities rather than subordinates to be commanded. The egalitarian relationship structure created partnerships that felt collaborative rather than exploitative. Pokemon worked with Ash rather than for him, pursuing shared goals rather than serving his personal ambitions. When Ash's personal goals aligned with his Pokemon's development and happiness, everyone moved forward together enthusiastically. When conflicts emerged between his goals and their well-being, he prioritized their well-being. These moments of choosing Pokemon over personal advancement defined Ash's character and cemented the loyalty his partners felt toward him. They knew he would make sacrifices for them, just as they made sacrifices for him. The reciprocity of sacrifice created bonds that couldn't be broken by distance, time, or changed circumstances. Pokemon who left Ash's active team maintained connection because the relationship transcended proximity. As rest deepens and these countless moments of partnership blend together into a tapestry of shared experience, what emerges is a truth about connection that transcends individual stories or specific battles. The 96 Pokemon who traveled with Ash each carried a piece of something larger than themselves, something built from thousands of small kindnesses and moments of mutual respect and trust that accumulated across years. Those pieces fit together into a legacy that continues teaching anyone willing to learn about what partnership can achieve when built on foundations of genuine care, patient understanding, and unwavering commitment to each other's well-being and growth. The morning routines that developed during Ash's journey revealed much about his relationships with his Pokemon. Each region brought different patterns, but certain elements remained constant across all of them. Pikachu always woke before Ash, the electric type's internal clock more reliable than any alarm. The yellow mouse would often sit watching Ash sleep for a few moments before deciding whether to wake him gently or let him rest longer. On days when battles were scheduled or important events loomed, Pikachu would use a small shock to jolt Ash awake. The electricity was measured, just enough to wake without causing real pain, a far cry from the powerful shocks of their first meeting. On calmer days, Pikachu would curl up on Ash's chest and wait, allowing his trainer to wake naturally. These moments of patience reflected how far their relationship had come from the early days of constant conflict. Other Pokemon developed their own morning patterns. Bayleaf would nuzzle Ash awake if given the opportunity, the grass type's enthusiasm sometimes resulting in Ash being knocked out of bed entirely. Snivy preferred to remain asleep as long as possible, the grass type valuing rest and showing irritation when woken before absolutely necessary. Ash learned to work around Snivy's preferences, letting it sleep during early morning preparations when feasible. Totodile would wake energetically, immediately ready to play or train, regardless of how much sleep it had gotten. The water type's boundless morning energy sometimes exhausted teammates who preferred quieter starts to their days. These individual patterns required Ash to think about each Pokemon's needs and preferences rather than applying universal routines. The attention to detail showed respect for their differences. Mealtimes became opportunities for social bonding within teams. Ash learned early that different Pokemon had different dietary needs and preferences, and he worked to accommodate them all. Pikachu's love for ketchup became so well known that Ash always carried extra bottles. The electric type's devotion to the condiment bordered on obsessive, but Ash indulged the preference without judgment. Munchlax required enormous quantities of food, its appetite legendary, even among Pokemon known for eating large amounts. Feeding Munchlax properly took planning and resources that Ash sometimes struggled to provide, but he never complained about the cost or effort, never made Munchlax feel like its natural appetite was a burden. The acceptance made Munchlax feel secure and valued despite its demanding needs. Some Pokemon were picky eaters, refusing certain foods or requiring specific preparations. Ash learned to cook different meals rather than forcing everyone to eat identical rations. The extra work was worth it because mealtimes became pleasant rather than stressful. Pokemon ate enthusiastically when food matched their preferences, maintaining better energy levels and morale. Sharing meals also created social time where teams could relax together. Battles and training were important, but these quieter moments built relationships that made everything else possible. Conversations during meals allowed Pokemon to communicate about things bothering them, ideas they had for training, or simply observations about their surroundings. Ash listened attentively, treating these discussions seriously. The communication wasn't always verbal. Ash learned to read body language, tone, and context to understand what Pokemon meant, even when they couldn't speak human languages. Pikachu's ear positions indicated mood and intent. Charizard's tail flame intensity showed emotional state. Bulbasaur's bulb would react to stress or contentment. Each Pokemon had signals that Ash learned to interpret. This nonverbal communication created deeper understanding than words alone could provide. Ash knew when Pokemon were tired, stressed, excited, or worried based on subtle cues most trainers missed. The ability to read his partners allowed Ash to provide support before problems escalated. He could address concerns when they were small rather than waiting until they became crises. Medical care for his Pokemon extended beyond just visiting Pokemon centers after battles. Ash learned basic first aid, how to recognize signs of illness, and when situations required professional intervention. Brock's presence during much of Ash's journey provided access to expertise that helped keep the team healthy. The breeder's knowledge complemented Ash's instincts, creating comprehensive care for all team members. When Brock wasn't available, Ash relied on Nurse Joy's guidance and his own accumulated experience. He learned which injuries could be treated in the field and which required immediate professional attention. The priority Ash placed on health maintenance prevented many problems from developing. Regular checkups caught issues before they became serious, keeping Pokémon in better condition overall. Some Pokémon required special accommodations due to their species or individual needs. Lapras needed water to stay comfortable. Charizard's flame required protection from rain. Geibel's tendency to eat rocks created unique digestive considerations. Ash researched each Pokemon's requirements and worked to meet them. The effort showed Pokemon that their well-being mattered more than convenience or cost. The emotional labor involved in caring for so many different Pokemon was substantial. Each had their own traumas, fears, dreams, and personalities that required individual attention. Chimchar needed consistent reassurance that it wouldn't be abandoned. Litten needed space to grieve, while also knowing support was available. Froakie needed challenges that respected its high standards. Balancing all these different emotional needs while also managing his own growth and challenges required Ash to develop remarkable emotional intelligence and stamina. Some days the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. Caring for multiple Pokemon, each depending on him for different things, created pressure that occasionally broke through Ash's usually optimistic exterior. During these moments of doubt or exhaustion, Ash's Pokemon often provided support that helped him recover. They recognized when their trainers struggled and offered comfort in whatever ways they could. Pikachu's presence alone often helped Ash feel better. The electric type didn't need to do anything special. Just being there reminded Ash why the journey mattered. Other Pokemon would try to make Ash laugh with silly antics, or would snuggle close to provide physical comfort. The support flowed both directions, creating truly reciprocal relationships. The vulnerability Ash showed during difficult moments taught his Pokemon that strength included acknowledging weakness. He didn't pretend to be invincible or hide his struggles behind false confidence. This authenticity made Ash more relatable and trustworthy. Pokemon knew they were partnering with a real person who had limits and struggles, not some idealized hero who never felt doubt or fear. When Ash made mistakes, he acknowledged them openly. The apologies to Pokemon he'd let down or decisions he regretted were sincere and followed by genuine efforts to improve. This accountability created an environment where everyone could admit mistakes without shame. If the trainer could acknowledge errors, Pokemon felt safer doing the same. The learning culture within Ash's teams emphasized growth over perfection. Mistakes were data points for improvement rather than marks of failure or incompetence. This mindset allowed for faster development because Pokemon weren't afraid to try new things. The fear of failure often prevents experimentation, but Ash's teams felt safe taking risks. The innovations that emerged from this experimental freedom often provided competitive advantages. Opponents facing Ash's teams couldn't rely on standard type matchup assumptions because his Pokemon regularly did unexpected things. Pikachu's ability to generate strategies mid-battle came from years of being encouraged to think creatively. The electric type learned that improvisation was valued, that finding novel solutions to problems was rewarded. Other Pokemon absorbed similar lessons and applied them in their own ways. Sceptale's use of terrain features during battles showed tactical thinking. Infernape's combination of Blaze ability with strategic focus demonstrated sophisticated battle awareness. These capabilities didn't emerge from rote training or memorization of standard techniques. They developed through environments that encouraged thinking, creativity, and personal initiative. Ash's role evolved from commander to facilitator. He created conditions where Pokemon could develop their natural talents rather than trying to force them into predetermined molds. The facilitation required a deep understanding of each Pokemon's inherent strengths and tendencies. Ash needed to recognize what came naturally to each partner and build on those foundations. Hawlucha's theatrical nature became an asset rather than a distraction. The fighting type's desire to look good while fighting translated into aerial techniques that were both effective and visually impressive. Oshawott tendency toward overconfidence was channeled into aggressive battle styles rather than being suppressed. The water type learned to back up its bravado with skill, becoming legitimately formidable. Each Pokemon's quirks and peculiarities were treated as features rather than bugs to be eliminated. The diversity of approaches and personalities strengthened teams rather than weakening them. Opponents who prepared for homogeneous teams, where every member fought similarly, found themselves confused by the variety in Ash's strategies. Each Pokemon brought different tactics and different energies. The unpredictability frustrated trainers who relied on careful preparation. They couldn't prepare for everything Ash might do because his options were so varied and his willingness to improvise so extensive. But the unpredictability also created challenges for Ash himself. Coordinating teams with wildly different fighting styles and personalities required constant attention and adjustment. The mental load of managing these dynamics during intense battles was significant. Ash needed to track multiple Pokemon states simultaneously while also reading opponents and adjusting strategies in real time. The skill required to do this effectively developed over years of practice. Early in his journey, Ash sometimes became overwhelmed and made poor decisions under pressure. The improvement was gradual but steady. Each region brought more complex challenges that pushed Ash to develop better battle management capabilities. By the time he reached later regions, Ash could track and coordinate 6 Pokemon simultaneously while maintaining awareness of opponent strategies and environmental factors. The growth was remarkable. His Pokemon's development paralleled his own. As Ash became better at managing battles, they became better at executing complex strategies and adapting to changing circumstances. The synergy between trainer growth and Pokemon growth created positive feedback loops. As Ash improved, he could teach his Pokemon more advanced concepts. As they improved, they could execute more sophisticated strategies he developed. This mutual elevation meant teams were constantly getting better rather than plateauing at fixed skill levels. The ceiling kept rising because everyone pushed everyone else higher. The competitive implications were significant. Trainers who assumed Ash's skill level was static based on previous encounters often found themselves outmatched when facing him again months later. The continuous improvement also meant Ash's later teams benefited from everything he'd learned from earlier ones. Lessons from Kanto informed training in Johto, which influenced approaches in Hoenn, and so on. Each region's Pokemon inherited accumulated wisdom from all previous partnerships. The knowledge compounded over time, creating increasingly sophisticated training environments. New team members joining in later regions had access to more developed training frameworks than early captures had. The advantage wasn't unfair because it came from Ash's own growth and experience. The mentorship from veteran Pokemon accelerated new members' development. Learning from Pikachu or Charizard provided insights that would have taken much longer to develop independently. These veteran influences shaped younger Pokemon's approaches to battling and teamwork. The culture of mutual support and creative problem solving was transmitted through generations of team members. When Ash's journey eventually concluded and his Pokémon scattered to various locations and purposes, they carried this culture with them. The influence spread through their interactions with other Pokémon and trainers. Charizard's presence at the Cherisific Valley changed the culture there, introducing more collaborative and supportive approaches to training. Other Charizard learned from its example and adjusted to their own behaviors. Squirtle's leadership of the firefighting squad emphasized teamwork and mutual protection, values learned during time with Ash. The squad became more effective because of these cultural shifts. Greninja's work protecting Kalos drew on battle skills learned from Ash, but also on the deeper lessons about sacrifice, duty, and using power responsibly. Each Pokemon became a vector for spreading Ash's philosophy beyond his direct reach. The ripple effects touched Pokemon and trainers who never met Ash personally but benefited from his indirect influence. The regional differences in how Ash approached training reflected both his growth and the distinct cultures of each area. Kanto taught basics with emphasis on exploration and discovery. The wide variety of environments in Kanto meant Ash's early team experienced diverse conditions and challenges. Forests, caves, water routes, mountains all contributed to well-rounded development. Johto brought more focus on the historical and traditional aspects of training. The region's connection to ancient practices influenced how Ash thought about his relationship with Pokemon. Visits to historical sites and encounters with legendary Pokemon in Johto deepened Ash's appreciation for the long history of human-Pokemon partnership. He learned that modern training existed within larger cultural contexts. Hoenn's emphasis on natural beauty and powerful legendary Pokemon created opportunities for Ash to explore environmental awareness and the relationship between Pokemon and their habitats. The team he built in Hoenn reflected that regional character. Many of his Hoenn Pokemon had strong connections to specific ecosystems or environmental features. A Sceptile's forest origins, Swellow's aerial mastery, Corfish's river habitat all showed how Hoenn's diverse environments shaped the Pokemon who joined Ash there. Sinnoh brought focus on mythology and the role of legendary Pokemon in shaping reality. The region's deep lore about creation and ancient conflicts influenced Ash's understanding of power and responsibility. Training in Sinnoh felt more serious than previous regions. The stakes seemed higher, the challenges more intense, the legendary encounters more directly consequential. Ash's team in Sinnoh reflected that intensity. Infernip's journey from traumatized Chimchar to powerful battler, Torterra's solid dependability, Staraptor's fierce loyalty, all contributed to a team that could handle serious threats. Unova's complete separation from previous regions forced Ash to start fresh with entirely new Pokemon. The reset was jarring, but ultimately valuable for his development. Learning to work with completely unfamiliar species tested Ash's adaptability and forced him to question assumptions he'd developed about training. The challenge made him a better trainer. His Unova team showed remarkable diversity in personalities and fighting styles. From Oshawot's dramatic flair to Snivy's cool confidence to Tepig's determined resilience, each brought something unique. Kalos introduced Mega Evolution and the Bond phenomenon, pushing Ash to explore depths of connection he hadn't previously accessed. The synchronization with Greninja represented a peak in his ability to bond with Pokemon. The intensity of that bond was both exhilarating and exhausting. Feeling Greninja's pain directly during battles created risks that Ash accepted because the power and connection were worth it. Learning to control and master the Ash Greninja form required Ash and Greninja to achieve perfect trust. Any doubt or miscommunication would cause the form to fail or become dangerous. The training process for mastering the bond phenomenon taught Ash lessons about vulnerability and openness. He had to lower all psychological barriers and allow complete connection with Greninja. That level of openness was frightening. Being truly vulnerable with another being, holding nothing back, risked deep hurt if the trust was violated. But Ash took that risk because the relationship mattered. Greninja reciprocated the vulnerability, opening itself completely to Ash in ways that went beyond normal Pokemon trainer relationships. The mutual trust created something unprecedented. When Greninja eventually left to protect Kalos, the separation hurt deeply precisely because the connection had been so profound. Losing that bond felt like losing part of himself. But Ash understood and supported the decision because he'd learned that loving someone sometimes means letting them pursue their purpose, even when it causes personal pain. The maturity required to make that choice showed how far Ash had grown from the 10-year-old who started with a stubborn Pikachu. The journey had transformed him in fundamental ways. Alola brought a different approach to training entirely. The region's focus on schools and education, rather than traditional gym challenges, created new contexts for Ash's development. Living in one place for an extended period, rather than constantly traveling, changed team dynamics. Pokemon had stable home bases and could develop deeper connections to specific locations. The island trial system tested different aspects of training than gym battles had. The challenges were more varied, requiring creativity and adaptability in different ways. Ash's Alola team reflected the region's laid-back but powerful character. Rowlet's constant sleeping, Lycanroc's unique dusk form, Incineroar's wrestling-inspired fighting style all captured Alola's distinctive flavor. The Z moves introduced in Alola added another layer to Ash's tactical options. The powerful techniques required specific poses and strong bonds to execute properly. Learning the various Z-move dances felt silly initially, but Ash committed to them fully because they represented Alola's cultural traditions. His respect for regional customs meant embracing even aspects that felt awkward. His Pokemon appreciated seeing Ash participate enthusiastically in local traditions rather than dismissing them as strange or unnecessary. The cultural respect he demonstrated influenced how they approached unfamiliar situations. Galar brought Gigantamax battles and intense competitive pressure. The region's focus on championship-level competition pushed Ash harder than previous regions had. The team he assembled in Galar was built specifically for high-level competition. Lucario's aura abilities, Dragonite's raw power, Gengar's Gigantamax form, Dracovish's devastating attacks, all chosen with serious battling in mind. But even in this intensely competitive environment, Ash maintained his core principles about respecting and caring for his Pokemon. The pressure didn't cause him to compromise his values. Winning the World Championship validated everything Ash had believed about training. The kindness-based approach he'd maintained despite criticism and pressure had led him to the highest achievement possible. His Pokemon shared that validation. They'd proven that teams built on mutual respect and genuine care could compete at the absolute highest levels without sacrificing their values. The championship also marked a kind of completion to Ash's journey. He'd achieved the goal that had driven him since leaving Pallet Town, climbing from complete novice to world champion. But the achievement didn't make previous struggles and failures meaningless. Every loss along the way had taught lessons that contributed to the eventual victory. His Pokemon understood this progression. They'd been part of the long climb, experiencing both the defeats that stung and the victories that validated their efforts. The perspective gained from the full journey made the championship more meaningful than it would have been if success had come easily or early. Ash had earned the title through years of dedication, through maintaining his principles when they seemed to hold him back, through refusing to compromise who he was for easier paths to success. His Pokemon had earned it too, through their loyalty and trust, through fighting for a trainer who valued them beyond their utility, through being part of something larger than individual achievement. The celebration after the championship included not just the active team, but recognition of every Pokemon who had contributed to Ash's development. The victory belonged to all 96 partners. The moment represented validation, not just of Ash's approach, but of every Pokemon who had believed in him and in what they were building together. Some had left before the championship run, pursuing their own purposes or staying in their home regions. But they were part of the journey that led there, essential pieces of the foundation. Butterfree teaching Ash about letting go, Pidgeot showing him sacrifice for greater good, Charizard demonstrating redemption and growth. All of these lessons contributed to the champion he became. The Pokemon at Professor Oak's lab celebrated as enthusiastically as those who had battled in the championship matches. They understood their role in the collective achievement. The unity of celebration reflected the unity of effort that had spanned years and regions. No single Pokemon or single team had done this alone. It required everyone. That recognition of collective achievement characterized Ash's understanding of success. He never viewed victories as purely his own, but as team accomplishments that included everyone who contributed. The humility kept him grounded even at the peak of success. He didn't become arrogant or dismissive of others after winning the championship. His Pokemon appreciated that consistency. Ash treated them the same after becoming world champion as he had when he was a struggling rookie. The success didn't change his core character. The relationships continued mattering more than the accolades. Ash valued his bonds with his Pokemon beyond what they'd helped him achieve. When eventually the time came to step back from active competition, Ash did so without bitterness or regret. He'd accomplished what he set out to do and was ready for whatever came next. His Pokemon faced similar transitions. Those who had been focused on battling needed to find new purposes, new ways to contribute, and feel fulfilled. Some became teachers, passing knowledge to younger Pokemon or helping new trainers develop their skills. Others took on protective roles, guarding locations or communities that needed their strength. A few simply retired to peaceful lives at Professor Oak's ranch, content to rest after years of intense activity and challenges. Ash supported all these choices without trying to force Pokemon into particular paths. As always, he prioritized their happiness and fulfillment over his own preferences. The respect for autonomy that had characterized his training extended into this transition period. Pokemon made their own decisions about what came next, and Ash facilitated rather than directed. Pikachu, as always, stayed close to Ash regardless of what form their partnership took going forward. The bond formed in that rainstorm when Ash protected Pikachu from Spearow had never weakened. The electric mouse had been Ash's companion through everything. Every region, every challenge, every victory and defeat, Pikachu was there experiencing it alongside him. That shared history created a connection that transcended words or formal structures. They understood each other completely, communicating through looks and subtle gestures. Other trainers marveled at the synchronization between Ash and Pikachu. The partnership seemed almost telepathic in how perfectly they coordinated during battles and daily life. The connection hadn't emerged fully formed. It developed gradually through years of constant companionship and shared experiences. Early miscommunications and conflicts gradually gave way to perfect understanding as they learned each other's patterns and preferences. The journey from Pikachu shocking Ash on sight to that effortless partnership of later years represented the full arc of what relationships could become with time and dedication. Every Pokemon who joined Ash's teams witnessed that relationship and saw what was possible. Pikachu and Ash modeled the ideal partnership that others aspired to achieve. The modeling effect influenced how Pokemon approached their own relationships with Ash. They saw the rewards of deep trust and worked to build similar connections. Not every partnership reached the intensity of Ash and Pikachu's bond. That relationship was unique in its longevity and the circumstances of its formation. But every partnership could reach its own version of deep connection. The specifics differed, yet but the core principles remained constant across all of Ash's relationships. Trust, respect, mutual care, open communication, willingness to sacrifice for each other. These foundations supported every successful partnership Ash formed. When these elements were present, relationships flourished. When they were absent or weak, struggles emerged that required attention and repair. Ash's ability to identify and address relationship problems prevented small issues from becoming insurmountable barriers. He noticed when Pokemon were struggling and intervened appropriately. Sometimes intervention meant giving space and time. Other times, it required active engagement and support. Knowing which approach each situation needed came from experience and emotional intelligence. The flexibility to adapt his support style to match each Pokemon's needs made Ash effective at helping partners through difficulties. Some Pokemon needed constant reassurance. Others needed independence and trust that they could handle problems themselves. Treating everyone identically would have failed to meet many needs. The individualized approach required more effort than universal methods would have, but the results justified the investment many times over. Pokemon who felt truly understood and appropriately supported performed better and were happier. The dual outcomes of improved performance and improved well-being aligned perfectly with Ash's values. He'd never wanted to choose between winning and treating Pokemon well. The assumption that these goals conflicted was false, proven wrong by his success. Kindness and effectiveness weren't opposing forces but complementary ones. Treating Pokemon well made them more effective, and their effectiveness emerged from feeling valued and supported. This positive cycle characterized all of Ash's most successful partnerships. The better he treated Pokemon, the more they thrived, which made him want to treat them even better. The upward spiral contrasted sharply with negative cycles other trainers experienced. Harsh treatment led to resentful Pokemon who performed poorly, which led to harsher treatment, spiraling downward. Ash had seen these negative patterns in other trainers and consciously rejected them. Even when frustrated or disappointed, he maintained baseline respect for his Pokemon. The discipline to remain kind during difficult moments was one of Ash's defining characteristics. It would have been easy to lash out when stressed or upset, but he consistently chose better responses. His Pokemon learned emotional regulation from his example. They saw him manage frustration constructively and internalized similar approaches to their own difficult emotions. The emotional intelligence within Ash's teams was remarkably high because of this modeling and the safe environment he created for processing feelings. Pokemon felt comfortable expressing emotions rather than suppressing them. Anger, fear, sadness, joy, all were acceptable and treated as valid experiences deserving acknowledgement. The emotional openness created deeper relationships because everyone could be authentic. Pokemon didn't need to hide parts of themselves to be accepted. The acceptance extended to personality traits that might be viewed as flaws. Oshawott overconfidence, Scraggy's aggression, Krokorok's aloofness, all were understood as parts of who these Pokemon were, rather than problems to eliminate. Working with these traits, rather than against them, created happier Pokemon who didn't feel like they needed to fundamentally change themselves to be valued. The philosophy of acceptance didn't mean Ash never encouraged growth or development, but growth came from building on existing foundations rather than tearing down and rebuilding personalities. Oshawott learned to back up its confidence with skill rather than being forced to become humble and cautious. The growth enhanced its natural traits rather than replacing them. This approach honored each Pokemon's inherent nature while still facilitating improvement and development toward full potential. The balance between acceptance and encouragement of growth was delicate but crucial. Too much acceptance without growth encouragement led to stagnation. Too much pressure for growth without acceptance led to resentment. Ash navigated this balance differently, with each Pokemon based on their individual needs and current situations. The constant adjustment required attention, but produced optimal development. The results spoke for themselves. Pokemon who trained with Ash developed fully into their best selves while maintaining authentic personalities. They weren't cookie cutter products of a training system, but unique individuals who had been supported in becoming the best versions of themselves. The diversity in outcomes reflected diversity in approaches. Ash's flexible methodology produced varied results because it adapted to varied starting points. Other trainers sometimes tried to copy Ash's methods and failed as because they applied them uniformly without the crucial adaptation component. The techniques mattered less than the underlying philosophy. Understanding and respecting each Pokemon as an individual was the foundation that made specific techniques effective. Without that foundation, even perfect technical execution would fall short of producing the deep partnerships Ash achieved. His Pokemon recognized that the relationship was the priority, not just the results. Ash cared about them first, and their battle performance second. This ordering of priorities paradoxically made them better battlers. Pokemon who felt valued beyond their utility fought harder and more effectively. The psychology was straightforward. When someone believes in you and values you unconditionally, you want to exceed their expectations and make them proud. Ash's Pokemon wanted to make him proud, not because they feared disappointment, but because his pride in them felt good and they wanted to earn it. The positive motivation was more sustainable than fear-based motivation. Pokemon driven by wanting to make Ash proud didn't burn out or become resentful over time. The sustainability of Ash's approach allowed for long-term partnerships that maintained intensity and effectiveness across years. Pokemon who returned to Ash's active team after time away slipped back into effective partnership quickly because the underlying relationship remained strong. The durability of bonds Ash formed meant his network of available Pokemon extended far beyond just current team members. In emergency situations, Ash could call on Pokemon from throughout his journey, and they would respond because the connection transcended active roster status. This extended network represented accumulated relationship capital that provided resources and options unavailable to trainers who only maintained shallow connections. The depth of Ash's relationship network amplified his capabilities beyond what any single team could provide. He had access to incredible diversity of skills and types through maintained relationships. Managing this network required ongoing effort. Ash couldn't just capture Pokemon and forget about them once they left his active team. He checked in regularly, maintained awareness of where different Pokemon were and how they were doing, and made efforts to preserve connections across distance and time. The relationship maintenance sometimes felt overwhelming given the number of Pokemon involved. But Ash prioritized it. That's because the relationships mattered to him beyond their utility. His Pokemon appreciated the continued attention, even when they weren't actively traveling with him. Knowing Ash hadn't forgotten them maintained bonds that might otherwise have weakened. The care Ash showed toward all his partners, past and present, active and retired, created loyalty that extended across his entire network. When younger Pokemon saw how Ash treated veterans with respect and maintained long term relationships, they understood they could expect similar treatment. The modeling of long term commitment reduced anxiety about being abandoned or discarded once their usefulness diminished. Security in the relationship allowed Pokemon to focus energy on growth and contribution rather than constantly worrying about maintaining their position. The mental space freed up by relationship security translated into better performance and faster development. Pokemon who weren't constantly anxious about abandonment could take risks, try new things, and push boundaries without fear that mistakes would cost them their place. The psychological safety Ash created within his teams was one of his most valuable but least visible contributions to their success. Observers often focused on battle strategies or training techniques while overlooking the relationship foundations that made everything else possible. But Ash understood that relationship health was the prerequisite for everything else. Without solid bonds, even perfect technical training would produce suboptimal results. The priority he placed on relationship building reflected wisdom gained through experience and natural empathy. Early in his journey, Ash sometimes prioritized results over relationships and learned from the consequences when partnerships suffered. The lessons were painful but valuable, teaching him that shortcuts in relationship building always cost more than they saved. By the time he reached later regions, Ash had internalized these lessons. He never sacrificed relationship health for short term competitive gains. The discipline to maintain that priority, even under intense pressure, showed maturity and commitment to his values. His Pokemon recognized and valued that consistency. They knew Ash's care for them wouldn't waver based on circumstances or convenience. The reliability of his commitment created stability that allowed everyone to take appropriate risks and push for growth without fear. As the full scope of Ash's journey with 96 different partners comes into focus, what emerges is a portrait of dedication that transcended simple competitive ambition. Each partnership taught lessons, created memories, contributed to mutual growth in ways that enriched everyone involved. The accumulation of experiences across years and regions built knowledge and wisdom that no single partnership could have provided. Ash became the trainer he was because of everything he learned from every Pokemon who trusted him with partnership. They became the Pokemon they were because of everything they learned from Ash and from each other through shared journeys. The mutual development created something larger than the sum of individual relationships, a legacy of partnership that continues influencing how humans and Pokemon relate to each other. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between sleeping and waking, the truth settles in gently, the simple reality that genuine care and patient understanding can transform what seems ordinary into something extraordinary that echoes across time and touches lives far beyond its original scope. The weight of specific moments from Ash's journey carries particular significance when examining the depth of his partnerships. Individual instances of connection, sacrifice, and growth revealed character in ways that general patterns sometimes obscured. There was the moment when Caterpie evolved into Butterfree to protect Ash from Team Rocket, transforming from the gentle caterpillar into a magnificent butterfly, specifically because its trainer needed help. The evolution wasn't scheduled or planned. It happened because love and loyalty created urgency that couldn't be denied. The image of Butterfree's wings spreading for the first time, catching light in patterns that seemed to glow from within, represented hope made visible. The small creature Ash had caught in Viridian Forest had become something powerful and beautiful through their shared journey. When that same Butterfree later chose to leave with the pink Butterfree during migration season, Ash's eyes filled with tears, even as he smiled and encouraged his friend to go. The simultaneous joy and sorrow of that goodbye captured the complexity of loving someone enough to let them pursue their happiness. There was the moment Charizard's frozen body lay on the ground after its devastating loss to Poliwrath, and Ash stayed awake all night, rubbing its body to generate warmth. Hour after hour, Ash's hands moved across Charizard's scales, refusing to stop even when exhaustion made every movement painful. The physical effort was significant, but the emotional commitment mattered more. Ash could have taken Charizard to a Pokemon Center and let professionals handle the situation. Instead, he chose personal involvement, personal sacrifice, personal connection during a crisis. When Charizard woke and saw Ash still there, still trying, still caring after hours of thankless effort, something fundamental shifted. The fire type had tested Ash repeatedly through disobedience and arrogance, but this moment proved Ash's commitment was unshakable. There was the moment Primeape defeated a fighter in the P1 Grand Prix, and Ash chose to leave it with that fighter to train toward its dreams. The decision hurt because Primeape had become a valued team member, but Ash recognized an opportunity for his Pokemon that he couldn't provide. The maturity required to make that choice, while still relatively early in his journey, showed Ash's capacity for growth. He could have kept Primeape, could have justified the decision by saying the fighter wasn't as good a trainer or that Primeape belonged with him. But Ash prioritized Primeape's development over his own attachment. The fighter could teach Primeape things Ash couldn't, could help it reach levels of fighting mastery that Ash's generalist approach wouldn't support. There was the moment Squirtle chose to stay with the Squirtle Squad to fight fires instead of continuing with Ash. The water type had found purpose beyond battling, a way to protect and serve that mattered deeply to its sense of identity. Ash could see the light in Squirtle's eyes when it talked about firefighting, could feel the passion and commitment that this work inspired. Asking Squirtle to give that up would have been selfish, prioritizing Ash's needs over Squirtle's calling. The goodbye came with mutual respect and understanding. Squirtle wasn't abandoning Ash, and Ash wasn't abandoning Squirtle. They were acknowledging that their paths diverged temporarily, that growth sometimes meant separation. There was the moment Chimchar's Blaze ability activated during a tag battle with Paul, and Ash saw the fear in Chimchar's eyes as the power overwhelmed its rational mind. The fire type was terrified of its own strength, traumatized by Paul's exploitation of this ability. Ash recognized immediately that this wasn't strength, but suffering. Chimchar's Blaze was being treated as a tool, rather than understanding it as a symptom of desperation and fear. The decision to focus on healing Chimchar emotionally before worrying about battle strength went against conventional training wisdom. Most trainers would have tried to harness the Blaze ability while teaching control, but Ash understood that Chimchar needed safety before power. There was the moment Greninja's transformation into Ash Greninja first succeeded, and Ash felt the full weight of synchronization. The connection was overwhelming, flooding him with sensations and emotions that weren't entirely his own. For the first time, Ash experienced what it meant to truly share consciousness with another being. He felt Greninja's thoughts, its battle instincts, its determination, all flowing through their connection like water finding new channels. The sensation was beautiful and terrifying. Beautiful because of the intimacy and trust it represented. Terrifying because losing that connection would leave a void that Ash had never felt before knowing it existed. There was the moment Ash's Alola classmates' Pokemon rallied to protect him from an Ultra Beast threat, demonstrating that Ash's influence extended beyond just his own team. The Pokemon belonged to other trainers, but responded to Ash's need because they'd observed how he treated his partners. The respect and affection they showed came from witnessing Ash's consistent kindness and courage. They'd seen him put himself at risk for Pokemon who weren't even his, and that selflessness earned their loyalty. There was the moment Pikachu refused to evolve into Raichu, even when facing a powerful opponent who had defeated it easily. The choice to remain Pikachu despite the offered power represented confidence in its current form and trust that strength could be found without transformation. Ash supported the decision immediately, never questioning whether evolution would be strategic or beneficial. If Pikachu wanted to remain Pikachu, that was enough. The respect for autonomy mattered more than any competitive advantage evolution might have provided. There was the moment Litton's mentor, Stoutland, passed away, and Ash sat with Litton through the night as the fire type grieved. No words could make the loss hurt less, but presence mattered. Being there meant Litton didn't face the pain alone. The patience Ash showed during Litton's grief process, never pushing for the fire type to move on before it was ready, demonstrated understanding that healing happens on individual timelines. Grief couldn't be rushed or scheduled. There was the moment Melton evolved into Melmetal by combining with dozens of other Melton, and Ash watched his small, curious friend transform into something massive and powerful. The evolution was dramatic and unprecedented, but what mattered most was that the personality Ash had bonded with remained recognizable within the new form. Melmetal's playfulness, its curiosity, its essential nature persisted through the transformation. The evolution had changed Melton's body, but not its soul, and that continuity allowed their relationship to continue without rupture. There was the moment Ash carried an injured Pikachu through a storm to reach a Pokémon Center, pushing through exhaustion and terrible weather because his friend needed help. The physical struggle of that journey, fighting wind and rain while cradling Pikachu, embodied commitment that went beyond words or easy gestures. Every step hurt, every gust of wind felt like it might knock Ash over, but he kept moving because stopping wasn't an option. Pikachu needed medical care, and Ash would get there even if it took everything he had. There was the moment Infernape finally mastered its Blaze ability during the battle against Paul's Electivire, transforming pain and fear into focused power. The look in Infernape's eyes showed confidence that had been absent before, certainty that it could control what had once controlled it. Ash felt pride so intense it brought tears to his eyes. Not because winning the battle mattered, though it did, but because Infernape had overcome trauma and reclaimed agency over its own power. The personal victory mattered more than the competitive one. There was the moment Ash dove into dangerous waters to save a drowning Pokémon he'd never met, acting on instinct without calculating risk or considering personal safety. His companions watched in amazement as he disappeared beneath the surface, trusting that his swimming skills and luck would be sufficient. The Pokémon he saved remembered that moment for the rest of its life. The human who risked everything for a stranger's safety demonstrated values that transcended species boundaries. There was the moment Sceptile overcame its heartbreak and regained its ability to use attacks effectively. The grass type had been devastated by romantic rejection, unable to function in battle because emotional pain disrupted its focus. Ash worked patiently with Sceptile through the recovery, never dismissing the heartbreak as trivial or demanding that Sceptile just get over it. Emotional wounds needed healing, just like physical ones, and rushing that process would only cause more damage. There was the moment Ash realized he needed to release Greninja to protect Kalos, and the decision tore at him, even as he recognized its necessity. The bond they'd formed through synchronization made separation feel like losing part of himself. But Greninja's purpose was clear. The region needed protection that only Greninja could provide, and Ash loved his partner enough to support that calling, even when it meant goodbye. The farewell was quiet, both of them understanding what it meant and what it cost. Words felt inadequate, so they simply looked at each other, acknowledging everything they'd shared and everything they were losing. There was the moment Rowlet fell asleep during a crucial battle, and Ash had to wake it gently while also dealing with an attacking opponent. The absurdity of the situation could have been frustrating, but Ash found it endearing instead. Rowlet's tendency to fall asleep at inappropriate moments was part of who it was, and Ash had known that from the beginning. Accepting Rowlet meant accepting the sleeping, even when it created complications. There was the moment Lycanroc's eyes turned red during a battle, and it attacked indiscriminately, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Ash put himself between Lycanroc and his other Pokémon, taking hits to protect everyone from Lycanroc's berserk state. The physical pain of those attacks was significant, but Ash never blamed Lycanroc for the loss of control. The rock type was struggling with rage it couldn't manage, and punishment would only make the problem worse. Instead, Ash focused on helping Lycanroc develop emotional regulation techniques. The training was slow and difficult, requiring patience and consistent reinforcement, but eventually Lycanroc learned to control the rage rather than being controlled by it. There was the moment Ash's Gibble accidentally used Draco Meteor and hit Ash instead of the intended target, sending its trainer flying through the air. The pattern repeated itself multiple times, becoming almost a running joke. But Ash never got angry at Gibble for the failed attacks. The dragon type was trying its best, and the fact that the technique kept going wrong wasn't due to lack of effort or care. Sometimes things just didn't work, despite good intentions. There was the moment Muck tackled Ash with so much enthusiasm that it knocked him over and covered him completely in sludge. The affection was genuine and overwhelming, demonstrating love in the most inconvenient way possible. Ash laughed even while covered in gunk, appreciating Muck's feelings, even if the expression of those feelings created problems. Love came in many forms, and Muck's particular form was messy but sincere. There was the moment during the Sinnoh League when Ash's team gave everything they had against Tobias's legendary Pokémon. They were outmatched in raw power, but they fought with heart and strategy that made the battles competitive. The eventual loss stung, but there was pride in how hard they'd fought. Tobias had legendary Pokémon on his team, creatures of immense power, and Ash's regular team had pushed them to their limits. There was the moment Hawlucha performed an elaborate aerial display small mid-battle, prioritizing style alongside effectiveness. The fighting type's theatrical nature could have been a liability, but Ash had learned to work with it rather than against it. The flourishes Hawlucha added weren't just showmanship, they were expressions of joy and personality that made battles meaningful beyond just winning or losing. There was the moment Weasel chose not to evolve, despite having opportunities, comfortable in its current form, and confident in its abilities. The decision mirrored choices other Pokémon had made, reflecting a culture within Ash's teams where evolution was optional rather than expected. Ash's consistent support for these choices had created an environment where Pokémon felt empowered to make decisions about their own bodies and development paths. There was the moment Totodile danced in the middle of a serious battle, seemingly oblivious to the danger surrounding it. The playful nature that defined Totodile's personality couldn't be suppressed, even in intense situations. Ash had learned to work with Totodile's dancing rather than trying to eliminate it. Sometimes, the joy and energy Totodile brought to battles created advantages that more serious approaches couldn't match. There was the moment Ash stood between his Pokémon and a legendary creature threatening them, his arms spread wide as if he could somehow shield them with his body. The gesture was more symbolic than practical, but it communicated commitment that transcended logic. His Pokemon saw Ash willing to be their shield, willing to put himself in danger to protect them, and that willingness deepened their loyalty and trust. There was the moment Tepig faced its former trainer in battle and overcame both the opponent and the psychological weight of confronting someone who had abandoned it. The victory represented emotional healing as much as competitive success. Ash watched with quiet pride as Tepig refused to be diminished by its past, choosing instead to demonstrate how much it had grown since being abandoned. There was the moment Riolu hatched and immediately bonded with Ash, the baby Pokemon seeing its trainer as family from its very first breath. The instant connection spoke to something deeper than conscious choice, an instinctive recognition of safety and care. Ash accepted the responsibility that came with that immediate bond, understanding that Riolu was depending on him in ways that went beyond typical trainer relationships. There was the moment Ash's championship victory was announced, and Pikachu leaped into his arms with electricity crackling from joy rather than as an attack. The celebration was pure and uninhibited, years of effort culminating in achievement that validated everything they'd worked toward. But even in that moment of triumph, what mattered most was sharing it with Pikachu. The trophy was nice, the recognition felt good, but having Pikachu there to celebrate with him was what made the victory complete. All of these moments, and thousands more like them, wove together into a tapestry of shared experience. No single moment defined Ash's journey or his relationships with his Pokemon, but the accumulation created something profound. Each instance of care, each sacrifice, each celebration, each quiet moment of connection added to a foundation that could support incredible weight when needed. The strength of that foundation showed during crises when everything seemed lost. Ash's Pokemon fought beyond what should have been possible because the bonds between them were worth fighting for. And in the deepest moments of rest, when consciousness fades toward dream and memory blurs with imagination, these 96 partnerships exist as eternal testimony to what connection means, how it forms, how it grows, and how it continues shaping the world long after specific journeys end.